Right, so here I am back in City Hall, banging the gavel, as is usual, to commence the webcast of the Economy Committee meeting to be held on Wednesday, the 17th of June 2020. And can I welcome Assembly members, invited guests and members of the public, both here, although actually there is nobody here, and also watching on the webcast to today's meeting. And the reason why nobody is here, including members of the committee, is in accordance with government regulations, we are holding this meeting on a virtual basis. I am the only person who is in City Hall, and all Assembly members other than myself and our guests are all participating remotely. I'm going to be calling Assembly members by name to ask their questions and reminding you to unmute yourself. And I will also introduce our guests, and we'll be doing the same and calling you also by name to help with the smooth running of the meeting. Now, today's meeting, not surprisingly, given our current situation of meeting virtually, is going to be focusing on the impact of COVID-19 on London's businesses. And we encourage anybody who's watching this on the webcast to take part in our discussion on social media using the hashtags Assembly Economy and hashtag COVID Recovery. We've got a number of items of formal business which we just need to go through before we get to that main item of business. And so could I now ask our clerk, Lauren, who is also here virtually, if you can unmute yourself and if you can confirm the names of the Assembly members who are virtually present at the meeting, and also let us know if there are any apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. The members currently on this call are yourself, the Chair, Assembly Member Cooper, the Deputy Chairman, Assembly Member Bailey, Assembly Member Desai, Assembly Member Hall, Assembly Member Qureshi and Assembly Member Russell. We've received no apologies for absence.
Thank you. And can I welcome Assembly Member Bailey to the Deputy Chairship of the committee and thank Assembly Member Hall, who's been the Deputy Chair for some little time, including last year, being Deputy Chair when I was Chair last year as well. And can I welcome both Assembly Member Desai and Assembly Member Qureshi, who are new to the committee, and welcome back Assembly Member Hall and Assembly Member Russell, who are serving on the committee again. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interests, which is found on pages 1 to 4. Could I ask members to note the list of the appointments set out on pages 1 to 4? And could I ask if members have got any further interests to declare? Is that noted?
Noted.
Thank you. And are there any further declarations?
No.
Okay, that's a no. Thank you very much. Item number 3, which is membership of the committee, which I've just referred to. Could I ask you to note the membership of the committee and the chairing arrangements, including welcoming Assembly Member Bailey to the Deputy Chairship? Is that noted?
Noted.
Thank you. Our terms of reference is also included in the papers as well. Could I ask the members to note the committee's terms of reference as listed in the agenda?
Noted.
Thank you. And we also have a number of standing delegations. Could I ask that members note the standing delegations as listed in the agenda?
Noted.
Thank you. We also have the minutes of 2 meetings which we held in February, just before we basically stopped holding any meetings after the 19th of March. And those minutes are found on pages 5 to 84, so including the transcripts. Could I ask you to confirm the minutes of the meetings held on the 12th of February and the 25th of February as a true record? Is that agreed?
Yeah. Agreed.
Thank you. We also have a summary list of actions on pages 85 to 108 of the agenda. Could I ask members to note the completed, outstanding and closed actions and additional correspondence we've received? Is that noted?
Noted.
Thank you. We also have action taken under delegated authority on pages 109 to 152. Could I ask members to note the actions taken by me as Chair under delegated authority in consultation with the party group lead members to agree the committee's reports as listed in the agenda? Is that agreed and noted?
Noted. Noted.
Thank you. And we've also had a response from the Mayor to the committee's report, The Future of Skills in the Low Carbon Circular Economy. And the response from the Mayor is to be found at pages 153 to 156. And can the committee note that response from the Mayor?
Noted.
Thank you. That brings us on to today's main item of business. And I'm very glad to welcome a number of expert guests who have been able to join us. In fact, we have quite a large number of expert guests, which maybe shows that meeting virtually is helpful for our guests. It obviously doesn't any longer involve the need to travel to and from City Hall. Our guests today are Rajesh Agrawal, who is the Deputy Mayor for Business, and he's going to be with us until 4:30. You're very welcome, Rajesh. We also have Laura Citron, who is currently not visible on my 9-tile screen, maybe visible on yours. She is the Chief Executive of London and Partners. We have Richard Burge, who is the Chief Executive of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We have Rowena Howie, who is the London Policy Chair from the Federation of Small Businesses. Caroline Julian, who is the Director of Policy and Programmes from the Creative Industries Federation. Helen Clark-Bell, who is the Chief Executive of the Love Wimbledon Business Improvement District. Bernard Donoghue, who is the Director of the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, of which we have many in London. And we also have David Sheen, who is the Public Affairs Director of UK Hospitality. And at 3 o'clock, we are also going to be joined by another Deputy Mayor, which is Justine Simons, who is going to join us, and she is the Deputy Mayor for Culture and Creative Industry, and also by Kate Nichols, who's the Chief Executive of UK Hospitality. So you're all very welcome, those of you who are joining us now. We have divided our questions up, and you'll gather from the nature of the guests that we do want to focus in on some of the sectors that we think are the hardest hit by the current COVID-19 restrictions, even though some of them are starting to loosen. And I'm going to start with the first question, which I'm going to address to all of you who are the guests, and I would like you to give a very quick snapshot of how London's businesses are faring and what are the main challenges that they face. But I'm going to start with the Deputy Mayor for Business, Rajesh Agrawal, and I'd like him to come in first to express how he sees that, and possibly from an overview perspective, whereas others will have a more specific position. So Rajesh, could I ask you
Thanks
how are
very
London's
much,
businesses
Chair.
faring? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the economic impact of the outbreak and the restrictions brought in to tackle it will have far-reaching and long-lasting impact. And the Mayor is determined to do all he can to support the economy over the coming weeks and months. Well, we've spent a lot of time in last few months talking to businesses, and what businesses are saying to us in our latest survey as well is very, very concerning. That 3/4 of them are saying that the revenue has been negatively impacted. Half of them say that COVID-19 has negatively impacted their ability to afford direct costs like rent. A third of them have furloughed the staff, and most worryingly, a tenth have made staff redundancies. At the start of the pandemic, the Mayor called a meeting with the London's business leaders to understand the unprecedented challenges that they face, and wrote to the Prime Minister to voice their concerns. Since then, both the Mayor and I and my team have been in regular contact with key London business groups, trade bodies, investors and entrepreneurs to understand the immediate impact of COVID-19 and what businesses need through this crisis and to restore confidence. Last week, I joined a meeting of a group of key business stakeholders who have been helping my team to keep the Pan-London Strategic Coordination Group updated throughout the lockdown on the potential impact for businesses in London. The Mayor has held meetings with a number of business leaders, including the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, and the CBI Director General, Dame Caroline Fairbairn. I've also met with leading business investors in companies like Infosys, Wipro, IBM. I've taken part in numerous business roundtables and virtual events. The mayor also launched Pay It Forward London, and as of 11th of June, around 200,000 businesses have
Rajesh,
200.
we're going
Sorry.
to come back to Pay It Forward, so perhaps we'll
Okay.
save the details of that until later. I'm really sorry to interrupt your flow.
No problem at all.
Was there anything else that you wanted to add? We'll explore Pay It Forward in a bit more detail later, or is that?
Well, all I would say is it's a very, very difficult time, very, very difficult circumstances for all businesses, as we know. We are doing all we can to support businesses. We're lobbying the government for it. And Chair, if I may, just to finish my point, is to say that London is a very resilient city, and we have overcome huge challenges in the past, and we will overcome this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can I just see from the guests on the screen, I might have to ask the guests I can't see to use the golden hand facility, but is there anyone who would like to add anything to what Rajesh was just saying about the current position from your perspective? So Helen Clark-Bell got in first, and then I'll take, I think it's Richard with his hand across his face. So I'm going to take Helen and then Richard. Thank you. And don't forget to put the golden hands down. Helen, you're next. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Leonie, and good afternoon to everybody. I suppose to add to Rajesh's, yes, there is some business resilience, but also a huge amount of adaptation. We have seen restaurants turn themselves into greengrocers, and we have seen also businesses being absolutely integral to building the local community response to COVID. And so that synergy actually between businesses and residents has never been stronger. Hospitality and cultural are going to have the largest impact, and I don't know if we're coming on to them. Presumably we are a little bit later, but they are the first to close and the last to open. So we will be seeing what that brings. Having just opened up Wimbledon yesterday, we have seen a very measured response from the local community. Businesses have opened very well and are very well prepared. So we are looking forward to a strong, resilient, but careful and responsible opening of the town centre over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Well, that's really encouraging. Thank you, Helen, to bring that sort of local perspective and to hear how embedded local businesses in a specific area have been starting to unlock, but also working successfully through this period. Richard, I just wanted to bring you in now as well, and then I've got Bernard who wants to come in as well.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to throw a dampener on the optimism and the resilience, but just a few facts and figures. We've just completed our quarterly economic survey of 500 companies across London as part of the nationwide survey. And it seems churlish not to give you some of the early results. And basically, we're looking at 60% of companies have had a major decline in their income. All of them have had drops in cash flow and are now dangerously close on reserve capacity. Only 24% of companies across London are operating at full capacity. And in terms of exports, we measure that through the export documentation we issue as the London Chamber. That is down to 40% of normal levels. And temporary export permits are virtually dried up. Those are the ones where people take equipment overseas and then bring it back. But certificates of origin are down to 40% of normal levels. I think the major problem that is being reported during our weekly SITREP, when we ring round companies and get their views on their qualitative views on where they are, is regenerating supply chains. What they're worried about is not so much their supplier or their immediate client, but the suppliers of suppliers and the clients of clients. Can you get a sequencing going in restarting supply chains? They're worried desperately about end consumer confidence, and that's largely retail. How do you get consumers to come back? So huge enthusiasm from us for the London and Partners scheme, which we'll doubtless discuss later. And the final thing, which is now coming across the radar of a lot of businesses because they simply had lost the bandwidth to keep it in mind, is the end of EU transition at the end of this year, and starting to realise that there is going to be a huge increase in a bureaucracy that 68% of businesses in London who export to the European Union have never had to confront before. They've only delivered to the European Union and received goods from the European Union. At the end of this month, it will be export and import, which is a whole different ball game for which they have very limited experience.
Thank you. Well, there's some very additional interesting points that you've made there as well. Thank you for that, Richard. Now I've seen Bernard and then I've seen Caroline. So I'm going to take Bernard first. If you could unmute yourself, Bernard.
Thank you very much. Just to introduce myself, I'm from the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions all the way across the UK, but about 30% of our members are here in London. As Helen rightly said right from the outset, tourism has been the first to be hit, the hardest hit, and parts of the visitor economy will be the last to recover. We've been fortunate in that some visitor attractions here in London have been able to open already. So places like Kew Gardens and the Royal Horticultural Society Gardens, Painshill Park. This week, thanks to some concerted lobbying and thanks to Assembly members for this in particular, we've been able to reopen London Zoo. And that's going to go on, and the cathedrals and St Paul's and Westminster Abbey. We expect the next round of visitor attractions, museums and galleries to open from the 4th of July. But that will be a staggered phased opening too. But some of our members, like Shakespeare's Globe and the South Bank Centre, the National Theatre and the Royal Albert Hall, are facing significant financial problems because of having to adhere to physical distancing measures and therefore massively reduce their capacity upon opening, which for some visitor attractions is not economically viable. To put this in context, tourism is worth £36 billion to the London economy and accounts for 1 in 6 of all jobs in London. In a normal year, London would account for 50% of all inbound visitors to the whole of the UK. And last year, London accounted for 55% of all inbound visitors spending in the whole of the UK. One of the greatest challenges, therefore, to the financial sustainability of the visitor attraction economy is the 14-day quarantine measures that have just been introduced by the government. I won't go into a great deal of detail because I know that we'll come on to this a little later, but just for context, 90% of all inbound visitors to the UK only come here for less than 2 weeks. A 14-day quarantine measure, therefore, means that we have lost 90% of the inbound tourism market to both London and to the whole of the UK for as long as those quarantine measures stay in place. Therefore, we're utterly reliant this year on the domestic market saving the London visitor economy. And therefore, the campaigns that are put forward today and launched today by London and Partners are absolutely crucial to reassuring Londoners that it's safe to go out and that visitor attractions and pubs and clubs and the other parts of the visitor economy are not just safe places to spend their leisure time and their leisure money, but actually we're reliant on the good behaviour and the contribution and the commitment and the love of Londoners to sustain what is London's largest part of the entire economy. That's tourism. Chair, I'll stop there and come in a little.
Thank you, because we are going to have some sort of specific groups of questions on some of these areas, hospitality, tourism, and so on. I've now seen Carolyn and then David Sheen. I'm just going to sneeze. And then also I've just seen another hand going up from... It's not Laura. I can't read who it is on the screen. Who's the additional guest? Rowena. Sorry, I can't read your... I can only see an A at the end of your name, but I know what Laura looks like, and unless she's completely changed her appearance, so you're definitely not Laura. So Rowena. So we'll take you in that order, but if you can be fairly pithy, because we will be coming back to lots of detail in all of these areas with specific questions from the Assembly members on the committee. So Caroline is next. Thank you. Unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for the invitation to join you this afternoon. So I represent the UK's creative industries, which cover a wide range of subsectors, including advertising and architecture, video games, music and film, fashion, publishing, crafts, and more. Before the pandemic, they were the UK's fastest growing sector, so generating £111 billion for the economy. That's greater than automotive, aerospace, life sciences and oil and gas industries combined. And £58 billion of that economic value was generated in London. We commissioned Oxford Economics to produce an analysis of the forecasted impact of COVID-19 on the UK's creative industries, which was published today. They will be integral to the UK's social and economic regeneration, but as you might imagine, the fallout from the pandemic has hit the sector hard and is putting the UK's world-leading creative output and the most vulnerable at risk. So research from Oxford Economics published today forecasts that there will be a combined revenue drop of 74 billion for the UK's creative industries in 2020, with a reduction of 29 billion in GVA. That's a reduction of 25% of its original GVA. They will be hit twice as hard as the wider economy. 406,000 jobs are expected to be lost in the sector by the end of the year. That's 1 in 5 creative jobs, including the termination of 287,000 freelance roles. And of all UK nations and regions, London is expected to experience the worst overall impact. So losing 109,800 creative jobs, that's 16% loss, and seeing a 14.6 billion drop in creative industries GVA, that's a 25% drop. And just to add that this impact is being felt by all parts of the creative industries because of their diversity and interdependence. So those reliant on footfall, as we already have heard, and audiences will be particularly hit. So performing arts venues, festivals, live events, and the artists and workers themselves, but also those working in, for example, publishing, who rely on high street sales, and other parts of the sector such as animation and visual effects, for which London is also very well world-renowned, expect to experience significant impacts later in the year, which is a really big worry because that's when the furlough scheme and other support schemes come to an end.
I think we're going to get back into this when Justine Simons joins us, who is the Deputy Mayor for Culture and Creative. So really, thank you. That's an overview with some very sobering figures in terms of the job losses. Now, the next person that I saw was David Sheen. Sorry to slightly cut you off there, Caroline. David, do you want to unmute yourself? And again, if you can set out how are London's businesses faring and the main challenges they face.
Yeah, afternoon all. I'll try and keep it brief. I think it's very brave to commission a study by Oxford Economics into the future. I think we'd be too depressed to do so at this stage for hospitality. Across hospitality, as people pretty much know, has been almost totally closed down for this period. Most pubs, restaurants, hotels, etc. are closed. We have had some businesses open. There have been hotels providing accommodation for key workers and vulnerable groups, and I know we've worked very closely with the team at City Hall in the early days to house some vulnerable groups. I think in that really early stage when there weren't proper processes set up, I know we certainly got a couple of cohorts into hotels. Takeaways and restaurants have done a great job providing meals where they can to residents, but also to providing free food into the NHS, and so have really played their part in the crisis. I suppose the issues that we're currently facing at the top level, obviously the furlough scheme and how we can reintegrate staff back into the business. That leads on to the level of uncertainty about how and when we reopen. We're all working towards the 4th of July, but how will that actually come about? Links again to Bernard's point on social distancing rules, and a couple of specifics around, particularly for the sector, the outstanding rent liability from that period when there was no revenue, but landlords in the main are still looking to charge rent, and that's storing up a massive problem for the restart process. And I suppose the fact that in London, London was less generously helped in terms of the grants for hospitality due to the higher rateable values across the country. So that 51,000 rateable value really cut out quite a lot.
I suspect we may also come back to that as well, not surprisingly, because that's a big concern to a number of Assembly members here in London. We know that the impact here is very different from it is pretty much everywhere else in the country. Can I thank you for that and then just bring in Rowena, because I want to start to move on to some of the subsequent questions. This is just sort of like the overview beginning at the moment. So Rowena, who's now vanished from my screen, if you can unmute yourself and speak, I'm sure you'll pop back up.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for the invitation. The Federation of Small Business published a survey in the middle of May that reported that 1 in 3 small firms who had closed feared that they would never reopen, and that was amid widespread redundancy fears. Of course, that's before the discretionary hardship funds have been brought in and before the reopening of non-essential retail. Much has already been covered here about the cost of doing business in London, so I'd just like to bring up the fact that we are very interested in doing everything possible to reduce the amount of redundancies, and beyond that, work towards job creation. And why I mention that here is specifically about skills and training. So there's been a lot of change during lockdown. Small businesses are very resilient, and many of them have pivoted and changed. That includes 57% of those businesses surveyed reporting that they are now carrying out community roles or increased community roles than before, and 16% reporting that they're doing new or increased online business. So I guess I'm just bringing up skills and training as a pivotal part of London going forward, certainly in terms of raising confidence and making a better London a better city for everybody to live in. So I'll keep it short and leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rowena, and that's excellent as an end to that first sort of overview section. In fact, actually, Rajesh, it brings me on nicely to something that I just wanted to put to you. I mean, you set out briefly what the Mayor is doing to support London's businesses through this time of difficulty and what engagement that you and the Mayor have been having. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit to the point that Rowena was making about looking to the future. Is the Mayor going to be producing an economic recovery strategy for London as we come out of the current COVID lockdown situation? Is that something that's going to be developed or has been developed?
Yeah, that is on top of our mind at the moment, Chair. There are 2 boards that have been formed. One is called the London Transition Board, which is chaired jointly by the Mayor and the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Robert Jenrick MP. They've already held their first meeting. That board will be overseeing the transition out of lockdown into the next phase, so over next few months. But the longer-term economic and social recovery will be overseen by a London Recovery Board, which will be jointly chaired and constituted by the Mayor and Councillor Peter John, the Chair of London Councils. They've also have met once. The Minister for London, Paul Scully, is also attending that meeting on behalf of the government. I mean, one of the most important things as we look at recovery is that we don't want to exactly go back to sort of old days. And I think the Mayor's vision for recovery is to reshape London as a city that remains open and attractive for Londoners, visitors and investors, that addresses deep-seated inequalities to create new opportunities for people and businesses to thrive whilst moving towards a low carbon and sustainable future. This won't be exactly a return to the past or business as usual. Things will change, and they must change in the way we work, the way we lead our organizations and our people. So at its heart, really, the recovery must be based upon a move towards a fairer economy and the one which is cleaner and greener. It goes without saying that the innovation would be at the heart of achieving that. London, I believe, is full of innovators. We are one of the most innovative cities. So I think there's a clear economic opportunity for entrepreneurs in London. We
Oh, I
move
think
towards
we just
this
lost
kind
you
of
slightly.
cleaner and greener economy.
I mean, I think that's right. I think a lot of people are talking about using the expression "build back better," so that we build something back, but it's better than what we had before. And they use that with reference to a whole range of different things. But one of the things that we've just touched on is the whole issue of the threshold for the business rates holiday, and obviously this 51,000 threshold is quite difficult in London. What would a higher threshold achieve, and how urgent is it that the Chancellor responds to the Mayor's letter? Because I understand the Mayor has written to the Chancellor to say, look, we really do need something different for London. Is there any news on that?
No, that is absolutely right. I mean, it's hugely important that we increase that threshold. There are many businesses in London which desperately need that help and are not getting it because the government has been too slow in coming back to it. That threshold, frankly, just doesn't work for London because I mean, take example. I mean, you might be a cafe in Westminster. You are still a very small, vulnerable business. Just because of the fact that you are based in central London, for instance, you are penalised for that, and it just doesn't make sense. So we'll continue to lobby the Chancellor and to other ministers and to the government to increase that threshold as soon as possible.
Yes, I mean, it's a shame, isn't it? Because I think it was quite a good concept from the Chancellor in terms of targeting for those businesses that were smaller, that had the premises that, had the lower rateable value. But in London, because rateable values are completely different, particularly, I think, in the West End and in, the central areas, I'm not really sure it's been working for us in London. So, and I can see a lot of shaking heads now in the 9 tiles. I think, even in Wimbledon, you do find that the rateable value's there just because of the values of properties. So that's the aspect in terms of the Chancellor. You did say that the Mayor is supporting businesses which have had a major shift in the number of employees working from home. Is that something that we're going to continue to be able to support? Is that something that the Mayor is particularly supporting? Obviously, with reference to public transport, that is something that has come up quite often.
I think it's very important. I mean, first and foremost, the lives are the most important thing, and that is at risk. And that's why the Mayor has been urging everybody to work from home if possible. Do not use public transport. If you can use any other mode of transport, you can do that. But we sort of continue to sort of support businesses in so many different ways. But there is so much more that can be done by the government and all of us together. But I'm particularly moved by how sort of businesses have also come along and sort of helped other businesses who could need help. We'll continue to support Londoners who are working from home. One of the big things about people as they work from home, also, especially in the lockdown, is they miss the social element, and it might have an impact on people's mental health. So that is another area that we are looking at and working on how best we can support Londoners in that area.
Thank you very much for that, Deputy Mayor. I think I'd like to move on so that we can ask a bit more from the Federation of Small Businesses and the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry around this area. And I'm going to ask Caroline Russell, Assembly Member, to unmute herself and to lead on asking those questions at this point. So, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so my questions are for Rowena Howie from the FSB and Richard Burge from the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So as a first first question, can you give us any insight about your members' experience of seeking support from the Mayor's Growth Hub during this period? So Rowena, do you want to start?
Certainly. We have had a range of experiences of people contacting the London Growth Hub, and I think it is fantastic that right away in early May, more of those services were immediately put online. I think we're all working together in terms of creating more signposting for small businesses on where to go to get the relevant information and how to make sense of the advice that is out there. So London Growth Hub has played a pivotal role. As always, there can be good feedback and bad, but I think it's largely based upon the fact that many businesses are at very different points in their journey. Everybody has experienced lockdown differently. I think in the first wave, there was very much a focus on just understanding the information, and that was very excellently done. Those people that were able to look ahead and think 3 months, 6 months, a year, 3 years ahead after the bigger, more complex questions, maybe the simple advice was not enough and that they would be looking for a stepped up level of advice. Now, the London Growth Hub is providing one-on-one appointments as well. So I would hope that the one-on-one appointments would be, as we go along, more heavily tailored towards different needs.
Thank you. And do you have any sense from the FSB? Do you keep any equalities data in terms of who the businesses that are applying for support and looking to the Growth Hub for support? Do you have any sense of that data?
I wouldn't have figures on people who've applied to London Growth Hub, no. Maybe the Growth Hub themselves do.
Rajesh, are you able to let us know is the Growth Hub collecting equalities data on the businesses that are applying for support through the Growth Hub?
We can certainly come back to you on that.
That would be great. I'm just concerned that BAME businesses are accessing support in the same numbers as other businesses. So that would be good if you could come back on that. Thank you. Sorry, Richard, did you want to just come in on the point about your members' experience of seeking support from the Growth Hub?
Yes, we look at our members' experience, but also the members of the 18 independent local chambers around London. It's been a bit mixed. A lot of it is to do with the capacity of the Growth Hub and a sense that also it is somewhat distanced from the reality of actually running companies, particularly small companies. I think what is missing, and this is not a complaint because I know resources are incredibly short, but support from City Hall for peer-to-peer support would have been hugely important if that money had been there. And I don't mean just us, I mean the FSB as well, where members can provide support to members, and a bit of support for that would have been hugely important and may have increased the reach of the Growth Hub's activities significantly. On your question on BAME, I'm afraid I do not have data on that at all.
Thank you. And do you think the peer-to-peer support is something that the Growth Hub should be looking at providing more of or enabling more of going forward? Because obviously it's not over. We're still working our way through all of this. Is it that the peer-to-peer support would have been useful over the last few months, or would it still be useful going forward?
I think peer-to-peer support is hugely useful, particularly for small and medium enterprises, because they get a lot of not just useful information, but a lot of soft skill support and a lot of emotional support as well. We have to remember most small businesses, and particularly all our members, are in it actually more emotionally invested than they are than financially invested. And that peer-to-peer support reflects that, and I think is a very good thing. I think it needs the Growth Hub to, in the longer term, medium to longer term, to think much more about how does it support and initiate things which are going to go on in the business community anyway, and not simply think it's got to do everything de novo or everything itself.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. And my next question to both of you is, how have small businesses been impacted differently to the larger businesses? So I don't know, Richard, do you want to go on? And then I'll answer.
Well, we're probably going to say the same thing. I think a number of things. I think they are emotionally resilient, but in fiscal and capital terms, very, very weak. So immediate and rapid access to sources of capital, I think, have been difficult. I think that's largely a problem with the banks. I feel that over the past 5 to 6 years, the banks have started to become very risk averse about small businesses in general, and particularly about the hospitality sector. Banks tend to relate to small businesses through an algorithm rather than through personal small business mentors and contacts. And so decisions are taken on the basis of not understanding a business, but by perception of the sector in which that business sits. So I think they've suffered from that. The final thing is to do with the way where most modern small businesses actually work. They work from home, or they work in co-working locations where they've been unable to access support, for instance, through rate relief, even though they may have been eligible for it if rates are broken down. And also they've been invisible largely because of the nature of the way in which they work to local authority. And I think that's something we need to solve for the future. I think somehow local authorities, particularly the borough level in London, need to be able to find some way of contacting small businesses which may be embedded in co-working spaces. So when crises like this appear, or when other forms of support become available in better times, they can reach them rather than spend days trying to find out whether they exist.
Thank you. Rowena, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I could just add to really hammer home that difference. You asked the difference between large and small. A small business has up to 250 employees. I think it's important just to use the word micro businesses here on this occasion. I think the figure is 885,000 micro businesses in London, single figure employee working in their own business. So I think there is even a huge difference in experience and type of support needed between micro businesses and some small businesses. So just to point that out, we were just speaking a moment ago about the peer-to-peer support, and we were also looking at BAME-led businesses and the support available. I'd just add that, I believe London Growth Hub is already addressing this, and it's something that we need to continue to address. But it's the type of support that is supplied that it depends on how appealing it is going to be, not to just BAME-led, but also women-led businesses, disability, LGBTQ. One type will not fit all. There's a lot of interest in the moment about how getting back to work is affected by childcare restrictions. And I think that can be very different for a single employee micro business compared to somebody leading a small business with more than 200 employees. The last thing I will just mention is about the characteristics of small businesses and micro businesses is that they are far more reticent of pursuing debt finance. Even to the level of not just commercial bank loans, but the bounce back loan, it has to be repaid. And reactions amongst small businesses and different groups within the small business world is incredibly diverse. I think there's definitely sort of questions to be asked in the future about what kind of equity finance could be made available and what kind of match funding. I mean, this is certainly being looked at elsewhere, but I think it's definitely worth mentioning here now.
Thank you. My next question is...
Caroline, I can see
yes.
that... Sorry to interrupt you, but I can see that Caroline, Julian, this is a bit confusing, would like to come in on this point. Can we just bring Caroline in? I'm sorry, it's very difficult to know whether you can see all the screen as well. Sorry to interrupt you. Caroline, can you unmute yourself? Caroline Julian, I mean.
Yes, and just very briefly to add and reinforce those points. So 95% of creative organisations in the creative industries are micro businesses. So just to say that we're receiving the same feedback, and many of the challenges that those micro businesses faced before the outbreak are going to be even more acute now in response to the pandemic, but also as we look to recover. So I think alongside, just to reinforce the points that have already been made, but also to add that many micro businesses in our sector, because they are reliant on intellectual property, on intangible assets, that adds another challenge as they approach mainstream lenders, for example, who don't quite understand their business model in quite the same way. But also as they look to kind of bounce back and grow, just to reinforce again the point that taking on more debt just is not possible for many because they are so lean and agile and rely on a very high freelance workforce.
Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. Something I just wanted to bring in at this point. I had a meeting with someone in the city up the other day, and they were saying that there's a 98% of the businesses in the city are small and micro businesses, and they have about 50% of the jobs. But the majority of their clients are in the 2% of businesses that provide the other 50% of jobs in the city in those big gleaming glass towers. And so I'm just wondering if you're aware of concern about those particular small businesses, say in the city, that are dependent on office workers returning to work, where it looks like those offices are not going to be filled for quite a while yet because of the social distancing problems, particularly with lifts and also with people actually making their way into London. Is that something that Rowena or Richard, that you've heard people being worried about, just as another difference between the small and the big?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just the city either. It is all of central London, and I can say that as a retailer in the West End with a small boutique there. For instance, or I can speak personally that on my street and speaking to small businesses that are similar on many high streets around London, the local coffee shop may have been just getting by with a sort of a loose takeaway service, but in fact, 95% of their business relies on the return of the office workers. And it's not just waiting for a date such as 4th of July of a holy grail of when everybody's going to return. We're all aware that there's going to be phased working in terms of coming back to offices in central London. So in that particular instance, one office will be bringing 40% of its workers back in early July, but then will be maybe only housing a quarter of its staff at any one point for the next 6 months until next year when they review the scenario. So yes, I definitely say that small businesses who rely heavily on not necessarily local footfall, but very specifically what you're saying, the employees of large offices that are all over the capital, I think that is a very important point, and how that could be addressed.
Caroline.
Thank you. Richard.
I'd reiterate what Rowena was saying, just add a couple of other things. One is, I think there is this issue of density of supply. And I think there's a lot of concern across businesses in the centre of London that while they desperately need tourism, both domestic and international back, we mustn't underestimate the amount of their business which is dependent upon the flow of commuter workers into London to provide them with the bulk of their business. The second thing is not just about when people come back, it goes to the point of just when do your consumers return. And I think people will be setting up businesses, and micro businesses particularly do not have the working capital available to stay open for long unless consumers actually appear pretty quickly, which is why the L&P programme is hugely important. Final things, I don't think this is going to be short term, this is going to be long term and if possibly permanent, is the density of people commuting into London on a daily basis into the centre going to decline to the level that the micro business infrastructure which supports them is going to be sustainable at current levels? Or are we going to see small businesses go simply because there isn't the density of people coming in every day, and that might be a permanent change? So we have to think again, I think, about the economic structure of the centre of London and things that government may need to do to possibly encourage maybe a return to more residents in the centre of London than there is at the moment.
and also obviously sort of where people are living, the opportunities for coffee shops and if people are more working from home, we're going to be looking at more sort of 15-minute neighbourhoods all over London with different economic opportunities, rather than everything being focused on the very centre.
Yeah, and that could be very, very exciting. So I'm not saying what I've just said about the centre of London is overall a bad thing, but what we have to do is plan for that, as well as plan for a potential in the outer boroughs, an increase, a more mixed economy appearing there than the commuter economy.
Yeah.
Caroline,
Lynn, you had to point out David has his hand up.
Well, I was going to say, we've actually got two people before David who've also put their hands up as well. And also Sean has very kindly messaged me to say that there is a question that he would like to ask. So Rajesh and then Helen and then David have all indicated. And Rajesh, as you come in to say what you were going to say, the question that Sean was interested in, and I think probably all of us as well, is if 51,000 isn't the right level for London, what would be a better level for London? Would that be 61,000 or 71,000 for the revised level? But Rajesh, if I bring you in, then Helen and then David Sheen. So Rajesh first, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Just the point that has been made earlier on around the peer-to-peer support. I'm a big fan of peer-to-peer support, and I think it offers incredible amount of value. And we do have a couple of other programs where peer-to-peer support is provided, and we leverage on that. There's a program called the Business Growth Program, which helps businesses grow, and we sort of connect them to a mentor, which is somebody who's more experienced, and help them navigate. So they are really, truly sort of business people themselves who are already running their business and then helping others. And London and Partners also where we put small but fast-growing businesses in touch with the larger corporates, and they're able to sort of support each other, because small businesses also offer great deal of innovation, which often larger businesses miss, and larger businesses offer the scale and the capital, which often the small businesses miss. So I mean, there's a lot of value in that.
And the threshold, and maybe the same question on the threshold to Helen and David when they come in as well. What would be better? Well,
threshold. Yeah, I mean the threshold. I mean, there've been different. I mean, 50,000, just 51,000, just doesn't work. So we've been talking about 150,000 is what we've been hearing from businesses. Would be something like that would be the right level for London.
Okay, so I'm going to bring in Helen to say what you wanted to say, but also a comment on the threshold if you like.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's really to reinforce Richard and Rowena in respect of small business owners are often on the high street as well. So they have those fixed premises costs, and often actually above the 51,000 arbitrary threshold that we've talked about. So it actually links it all together, that they have suffered immeasurably because they don't, they're not supported by any of the governmental support. As good as the governmental support has been, there are a lot of businesses in London that are directly impacted about that. I reckon that in Wimbledon there are about 180 businesses that would be supported if the RE was to raise to 150,000. That would be supporting 5,500 jobs, which is about 30% of the employment in the town centre. So these are not insignificant figures that we're talking about. You know, this is an outer London borough. Yes, we are dependent heavily upon the office workers returning, but we are also changing our language and our marketing. Hence, we're heavily engaged with the London and Partners programme as well in relation to targeting those people that are working from home locally to support their local town centre instead of just doing the commuter aspect. With regards to the rateable value specifically, it's a cut-off, it's a cliff edge at 51,000. Has anybody considered a tapered relief at the very least, so that there is some level of support for those that are at 52,000, 53,000? It is such a harsh reality at the moment. To just stop at 51,000, which is totally arbitrary from our perspective.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring in David, but can I just say that we're coming up to 3 o'clock now, which is when we sort of hope to finish this section. So we probably need to start picking up the pace a bit, because we've still got a few questions from Caroline and some from Susan to put to you before we move on to the next section. So David, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Just to be brief, and coming in on that previous point about the sort of return to office work in London at the moment, there's a lot of businesses set up, coffee shops, large and small, pubs, restaurants that are very, very dependent on that trade, and that's a massive, massive concern for the sector at the moment, that those people are not returning, and as I think someone mentioned, not likely to return particularly soon. Added within our sector, we've also got contract caterers who supply the catering into those big shiny buildings that you mentioned, and that's a considerable number of jobs that we're talking about here, and I think we just need to be very cognizant of the fact that those jobs are at risk if there is no return. But that's, and on the rateable value point, I think we've called previously for 150,000 rateable value, so we'd be comfortable there. And just my final point is my chief executive has now joined us, so I'll hand over to Kate Nichols to carry on the call for UK hospitality. But thank you for your
David,
time.
can we thank you for your contribution? I had seen that an icon because that says KN had arrived, but thank you very much for that. Caroline, I'm going to come back to you now, and if we can, as I said, pick up the pace a bit with the subsequent questions and snappy answers, please, also guests. Caroline. You're on mute. Sorry, I forgot to remind you to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. I was being so good about being muted, so you didn't hear me scrape my chair. These are the last two questions for Rowena and Richard. I'm actually going to put the two questions together. The first one is, what challenges did businesses face initially in accessing the coronavirus business interruption loans, and have these been addressed? And the second question is, has the furlough scheme been successful in supporting businesses? And what concerns do you have about the tapering of government support for this scheme? And
so
that's obviously particularly in relation to micro and small businesses.
So shall we start with Richard first,
Rowena.
and then Rowena? Oh. So CBILS and furlough, essentially. Richard.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I've got slightly slow my end of getting the microphone off. Couple of things. First of all, CBILS. I think initially the big problems were, as I said earlier, banks were just not tuned in well enough to micro and small enterprises. I think Rowena's right, it's micro and small. They just had no knowledge of them, no contacts, no ability to deal with it. And secondly, there were too few banks. The British Business Bank decided that it would gold plate the process by which the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority authorises banks, and would have their own authorisation system. So the result was there were a lot of small insurgent banks who a lot of small businesses have been encouraged to go to in order to diversify the market, spent ages trying to get themselves on the British Business Bank's list so they could provide access to CBILS. That was frankly nonsense. In terms of the furlough scheme, yes, there are things wrong with it, but frankly, overall, it's been a huge success, and things would have been very, very different in the wrong direction if it wasn't there. On the tapering scheme, obviously, the longer it can go on, the better, to mirror the rise in the economy rather than an artificial date. But I think the big thing is I think it's got to be sector specific. I do believe that there are certain sectors, particularly in the hospitality and travel sector, that are going to need the tapering, going to need furlough much longer than other sectors.
Thank you. I did raise the sector-specific question at an Institute for Fiscal Studies event, and all of the people on the platform said that they thought that was a good idea. So it's something I've been thinking about for some time. Rowena, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Indeed. With relation to CBILS, there was definitely a lot of problems in the beginning with access to the banks and communication points into the banks. Don't forget that a lot of small and micro businesses do not have relationship managers. It is a large entity of a bank versus a very small company. So finding the means of communicating in, because CBILS at the beginning, there was no online application forms. You know, this was all delivered as a process in progress over a number of weeks. And even once communication processes were established, even once application services did go online, the delivery was still difficult. And you still have what I mentioned earlier about a lot of small businesses being reticent about accessing debt finance, not to mention the calamity that was happening where everybody did not know what was happening, and business, for many small businesses, had just suddenly fallen off a cliff edge. So by the time we got to May and the bounce back loans were being introduced, thank goodness for the business, the bounce back loans, a lot of people converted from a CBILS to a bounce back loan. I don't have an exact figure on that. I could probably find out for you, but that definitely occurred. With regard to the furloughing, yes, absolutely. The part-time furloughing is a very good thing to have been brought forward. It's been said before, so all I will say is to just raise yet again the small businesses that have been left out, who have not had any access to finance or personal support, and that would be the directors of limited companies. There is still problems with self-employed. I won't go into detail here, but I'm just recognising that there are some people, some parties who have not had access yet.
Okay,
Do you think
thank
anything
you very much.
that could, sorry, Rowena, could I just come back on that? Just, is there something that could be done to help those people who haven't had access to finance?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, much conversation has gone on. Both Federation of Small Business, CB, the Chamber, etc., are all in talking to government. I couldn't provide a solution here on this call, but let's say that it still needs to be addressed, and it's a very important point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, I know we're due to come to your group of questions next, but I'm just trying to spot if the new icon that has appeared is Justine Simons. And if it is Justine, then I will move to the section of questions to Justine and then come back to yours, if I may, because she has a finite amount of time. Justine, is that you that has just arrived? Because I can't...
Yeah, I have got my video on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no,
see me?
We can now see you as well. Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's just your icon didn't have JS in it, so I wasn't sure it was necessarily you. So sorry about parking you just for a minute, Susan, but we'll just go with Justine. And so the first set of questions to Justine is actually going to be Caroline. So we'll come straight back to Caroline to ask Justine. Caroline Russell, unmute yourself.
I have indeed. Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, Justine. So my sort of first question for you is, what are the main challenges faced by the cultural and creative industries due to COVID-19? And are there any parts of the sector who are hit more intensely than others?
Yeah. Well, hard hit is the headline. I mean, you've seen the figures today. I'm sure the Fed have talked to. What it means for London is that we're looking at a loss of 14.6 billion GVA just from London's creative economy alone, and that's 1 in 6 jobs in the creative economy. So it's a catastrophe, basically. I mean, I think the other thing about the way in which the sector is structured is, it's mostly SME. So it's quite fragile in terms of its kind of structure as a labour market. I think in London, something like 30% of the creative workforce are freelancers, and something like over 60% of freelancers have seen 100% of their work collapse. So it's really, really hard hit. And, we're doing what we can at City Hall, absolutely everything we can think to do. But, we need a deal from government. We need the government to do what they've done in other countries like the Netherlands, like France, like Germany. We need some bravery, because this is the kind of industry that, it delivers masses back for the investment that goes into it. It's good value for money, all the kind of spin-offs with the supply chain, with the cultural tourism, etc. So Yeah, it's a bleak picture, Caroline. But in terms of this part two, which is who's been hit hardest, I would say obviously freelancers, because of the structural thing that I've just spoken about, was estimated that I think 1 million freelancers have dropped through the net in terms of the government support. And then, I mean, the immediate hit was really all the grassroots organisations, because they're already pretty fragile, and that's what our Culture at Risk Emergency Fund has targeted. So like the grassroots music and artist studios, LGBT plus venues, independent cinemas. So they've been really hard hit. But, you know, it's across the board. I mean, we've supersized our Culture at Risk office, and, you know, we've had like 500, got over 500 cases now, which is, in the last 4 years, we had only 350 for the whole term. And, you know, what we're seeing now is, you know, normally it is those really grassroots organisations that are really at the kind of edge and in that fragile place. But, you know, we've got organisations like the Royal Albert Hall, the South Bank Centre, you know, the National Theatre, the Old Vic, you know, really big, iconic, major cultural institutions. You know, I mean, I'm just trying to remember, the Royal Albert Hall emailed me yesterday and said they, with no other government help, they'll be insolvent by the start of the new year.
It seems that these big cultural institutions, that more and more of them have become reliant on income from restaurants, cafes, gift shops and things like that, where they're very, very dependent on footfall as to make up and that kind of retail side to make up the income to support the cultural activity. And I was actually struck by the similarities between that and the complete brokenness of the model of Transport for London's income, where they're totally dependent on fares income. And then when your footfall disappears, then you have a broken financial model. And it seems that that model for the cultural institutions seems to be very broken. Someone was saying that the South Bank Centre also relies on income from renting out restaurants in the Undercroft. And obviously, you know, those restaurants have all needed rent relief, quite rightly, but actually then that cultural institution that is contributing to all the good that you were talking about just now is you know, who then can support them. So are you talking to government about support for these big cultural institutions in London, and how are those negotiations going?
Yeah, I mean, just to reflect on your point, you're right. I think there's another part to it as well. So part of it is the reliance on, you know, retail and restaurants. But the other thing about the funding model is that, you know, in this country over the last kind of decade or so, we've moved towards an increasingly kind of slightly different balanced model where, you know, organisations, arts organisations have been encouraged to be entrepreneurial, right, to kind of bring in more money from different sources. And so, you know, what's happened actually is the people who've been the most entrepreneurial have been the hardest hit by this because they haven't got that relationship with the public sector or the Arts Council, etc. in that way. And that's why we're seeing those organisations that don't have, for example, Arts Council funding, like the Old Vic, like the Royal Albert Hall, you know, they are really, really hard hit because they've got no lifeline and no kind of relationship. So that's one part of it. And then I think it's important to kind of distinguish between the different situations in Europe, because, you know, we've seen a lot where, like, you know, for example, kind of theatres in perhaps Germany and France have been able to kind of get themselves open at a much reduced capacity. And the reason they can do that is because they got more public subsidy. So they've got the kind of cushion to be able to open with like 30% capacity. Whereas in the UK, that's untenable because, you know, we can't, none of our theatres can open at 30% capacity. That's just the route to bankruptcy, you know. But yeah, your second point was what are we saying to government, right? Yeah, so we've been lobbying government on all of this. You know, I wrote to the Chancellor, I've written to Oliver, the Secretary of State. The things we've asked for are we want a sector deal that is, you know, on a par or greater than, you know, our other European counterparts. We want, for example, furlough to be extended in a kind of tactical way. So, you know, we're seeing that museums are opening right now and they are better able to manage social distancing because of the structure of their buildings and the way in which crowds move through them. Whereas a theatre, or a small grassroots music venue, that is impossible for them right now. So what we want is for furlough to be extended for those creative businesses that just can't, for health and safety reasons, open up right now. And that just seems to be a kind of logical thing because of the way they're structured. We want a consumer confidence campaign. We want to encourage people back. I mean, Bernard can talk to this too. He's been gathering fantastic insights about what consumers want and need and how they're feeling about coming back. We want clear guidance on exit. Some of that is coming through now. And, you know, the big thing we want as well is for the creative economy to be positioned as a kind of at the heart of a recovery strategy from government. You know, you look at what happened in 2008 after the recession, and it's clearly documented that, you know, the film industry was one of those industries that really helped to accelerate our recovery as an economy. And so we want to see the creative economy positioned in that priority place on the leaderboard. You know, we want it to be able to play its part in rebooting the economy. Yeah, and then just finally, the other things we want are, we want, again, culture to be really centrally positioned in the reboot of tourism, to re-establish international tourism. And we want to look deeper about the resilience in the labour market. You know, what the kinds of things you've talked about really expose the fragility with freelancers and small businesses, you know, and, you know, we really want to fix some of those systemic, you know, some of that systemic fragility, really.
So is that, are you in the recovery board? You're on the recovery board, I think, are you, Justine?
No, I'm not on it myself, but of course all of this stuff, it kind of feeds into it. There's lots of subgroups.
Feeds into it. Yeah. So sort of, so what kind of, what are you doing in terms of developing strategy for the recovery, kind of connected with the with culture and creative industries?
Yeah, I mean, lots. You know, I mean, as ever, I think the job of City Hall is to work out, you know, how we can bring to bear the things that we've got in our toolkit and make the best difference, you know, with the problem at hand. And, you know, part of that has been convening. So we've run, you know, loads of roundtables just to get people together to try and kind of work through this stuff together. Bernard and the Fed have joined lots of those. You know, for example, we held one on exit from lockdown, where we brought together different parts of the creative economy. So what we learned was that, you know, the film industry are way ahead of the game. You know, our agency, Film London, have led a kind of global consultation, and they've now published, you know, the guidance on how to, you know, do a socially distanced film and a production, and that is all published, and that is fantastic. Other industries were learning from what they were doing, and also internationally, I've been chairing kind of almost weekly calls with the global cities on the same kind of, you know, kind of key topics. Because also what we're seeing around the world is that different cities are at different points in the curve around COVID. So we've learned a lot from China, who are kind of really ahead of us. And then we're working through a lot with our European counterparts on how we share modelling, how we can disseminate what are the kind of practical things we can do, you know. So that's on recovery. And then, of course, you know, we've done lots of roundtables on things like working with, you know, diverse-led organisations who serve underrepresented communities who, you know, as we all know, have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. We've worked with the Fed on roundtables around freelancers. We've co-hosted those. High streets, you know, different borough culture officers. We convened sessions with all the culture officers in the borough, so quite a lot around that. And then, of course, we've got our Culture at Risk Fund and our office, and quite a lot.
One of the things that we were talking about, I think, just before you joined the call, was the potential for much more dispersed economic activity over London as more people are working from home. So that it seems the opportunities for the borough culture work to kind of really support activity kind of in a dispersed way across London might actually be helpful and constructive in this situation.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you know, what we can see, Bernard can talk to this, but what we can see and Laura will too, but what we know all around the world is that in terms of kind of consumer confidence, getting people back out and about, international visitors, everyone's starting local. So it's like, what is on your doorstep? That's your first step, you know, and London and Partners are doing, you know, campaigns around that. And of course, culture's at the heart of that. And we've already got as you say, the London Borough of Culture, but for example, we've also got the creative enterprise zones in 6 different boroughs, and they're fantastic business support hubs as well, you know, supporting all those kind of small SMEs, local businesses. So it's also a question of not kind of like inventing mad new things, but just kind of really looking at where we can really evolve and pivot what we've got to make the best possible kind of difference, you know. And you'll see in Brent, you know, for Borough of Culture, we've had to shift the timetable a bit with all the London Borough of Cultures. But you know, they've done a lot online. They're working with Vice, with all their young people doing fantastic kind of podcasting that's been downloaded thousands of times. So there's lots of kind of imaginative work happening, and there's lots of work where we can kind of deepen into the networks that we've already got. But that doesn't take away from the catastrophic hit we are taking. You know, let's not get kind of distracted by it. You know, it is really catastrophic.
Now, I'm about to hand over to the next questioner, but my final question would be, do you think the government understands the catastrophic nature of what is hitting the creative and culture industries?
I don't know. I mean, you know, we've written to them. I've asked for a meeting with the mayor and myself. You know, I mean, Bernard, I think, is on one of the committees. There are kind of a proliferation of task forces and meetings and dialogues with different parts of the industry. But I mean, we haven't seen any kind of bold sector-specific, you know, kind of package really, and it is absolutely reached a tipping point now. And you know, I am really concerned that, you know, other national governments are kind of ahead of us, and they understand the value of the creative economy to their nations, to their cities. And you know, I really, really, really hope that the government don't mess it up, and that they are bold, and that they are brave, and that they show some leadership on this. Because if we lose it, you know, it's irreplaceable.
Well, and irreplaceable to tourism and, you know, all sorts of other bits of our economy. It's not just sitting in a... Yeah. £40 billion additional income economy gets for the economy comes out of the supply chain. So you've got 58 billion is the creative economy value for London, then plus another 40 billion in the supply chain. So that's like hairdressers and carpenters, plus the value to tourism, you know, and that's just the kind of hard stats, let alone the kind of value to people's lives, you know. It is the kind of industry where it kind of delivers exponentially, you know, kind of above and beyond its kind of core bits, you know. Yes.
In terms of the social fabric, the tourism, the health and well-being, the international positioning, you know. So investment is well spent, you know, it delivers a lot back, but a lot's at stake.
Indeed. Thank you, Justine. I'll hand back to the chair. And I know Caroline Julian was wanting to come in, but I know there are questions being addressed.
I was going to say, I've seen you, Caroline Julian. Thank you, Caroline Russell. There's too many Carolines involved in this. It's all getting very confusing. I'm going to call you Caroline Bailey in a minute, Sean, obviously. We're going to move on to the next set of questions, which is going to be from Sean Bailey. But as he is going to pose them to you, Caroline Julian, and obviously if Justine, if you want, you may wish to come back in again because this is all still on creative and cultural. If you're able to stay, because we know you do have to go. So if you can hold your thought for what you wanted to contribute just now and perhaps work it in your answer to one of Sean's questions. And Sean, don't forget to unmute yourself, and you are up.
Afternoon, Caroline and Justine. Great to see you both. I've called you out because I'll address most of my questions to you all. Just to start, I think Assembly Member, the last Assembly Member Russia was slightly rough on the government there. We are talking about a government that's pledged £352 billion to help us deal with COVID, and I would suggest that's quite a serious sum of money, and I think they are focusing on you know, helping the country recover. So I would put that into the mix. It's clear by Justine's comments, which I agree with, that this is a calamitous shock for the sector, and for London in particular. This sector is vital. I fully accept that. I think I want to pose my first question to you both. Does the hospitality sector require further specific guidance to open safely and minimise the risk of spreading the virus? I say that because your comments around theatres not being able to open at 30% capacity make complete sense to me.
Sean, we're not in the bit on the hospitality sector. We're still talking about the creative industries sector. So can we stick with creative and cultural rather than second set of questions on hospitality.
Which number question are you talking about, Chair? I think I may have listed them the wrong way round.
I think you might have recorded them the wrong way around. I mean, what we're really interested in, Caroline, Julian, and also Justine, is do you think that the Mayor's efforts to support culture and creative industries, such as the establishment of the Culture at Risk Fund, has been enough? And I'm going to start with Caroline with that question. Do you think the Mayor has been doing enough?
Yes, and this is one of the points I was going to add further to Justine's very well made points just now. Just to put on record a huge thank you to Justine and her team, who have been extremely constructive, responsive in the kind of crisis that our sector has faced over the past few weeks and is looking to face. And the programmes that have been designed and the initiatives that have been tweaked and repurposed in order to support creative organisations and freelancers across London have been done in close consultation with us, and we know with many creative organisations, freelancers and others across London, with a particular effort to ensure that that consultation is really quite diverse as well. So that the feedback we receive from members is very positive. The only other thing I was going to add further to Caroline's questions earlier is that we are completely aligned with Justine on the asks that we are making of UK government. Sean, I completely agree that our UK government has done a huge amount to support all industries, and the furlough scheme and the self-employed income support scheme have been particular lifelines for those across the creative industries. There is still a big concern about those self-employed workers who fall through the gaps. So as Justine says, a third of our workforce are freelance across the UK. That's compared to 15% of the freelance workforce employed by those across the economy more broadly. So our sector will face, and those individuals very personally will face quite a few more of those impacts both now and going forward. So I think I would urge with any kind of UK devolved and local schemes that support is directed in particular toward them. And the other issue, as I mentioned kind of previously earlier in the session, has been access to finance, and just making sure that now as we move from response to recovery, that we look at systemic change and not just at old models that used to work for more traditional industries. The creative industries are an archetype of industries of the future, industries that will be so crucial to building back better, as you say, growing back better, and ensuring that we are resilient and we do contribute to not just the nation's and London's economic health, but our mental health and our social findings as well. So those are just the kind of additional points that I wanted to make there.
Thank you. What do you think the recovery of the culture and creative industries could look like when we do manage to start to open back up?
It's a good question. I think there's a real opportunity here to just really think again from a blank sheet of paper. We're currently in conversation with our members, so undertaking quite a significant consultation just to think through what this recovery could look like, how we could go about reimagining what our economy and society could look like, and not just looking at tweaks around the edges. So we are very much in the midst of that. We are.
And can I just ask, are you sharing the feedback that you're getting from your membership through that consultation with Justine and her team? I presume that from what you said earlier, it sounds as though there's some close working going on. So anything that City Hall can do to assist with that, you're pulling that information towards City Hall so that that can be done.
We are, absolutely. So we have weekly catch-ups in place, and we're in touch far more frequently than that besides as well. And what's something that our members are really keen to think through together with yourselves and others across the country is how can we emerge not just with ideas as to what UK government could do, but what industry could give back. So what is it that industry could commit to help us regenerate the UK, regenerate London in an economic and social way? And there's a real keenness across the creative industries to do that and work in partnership.
But at the moment...
Can I just interject and ask the same question to Justine? Because Justine, you alluded earlier on to the model that encouraged lots of different venues to seek different revenue streams. And it just struck me that made our sector broader, more sustainable until COVID arrived. So what kind of breakdown are you looking at now? And what what financial cost would this be to the government to provide the new kind of model you're looking at?
I mean, I don't think we can go. I'm not advocating that we move to a different radical model. I just think that's not possible to kind of move to, for example, the German model or the French model. But I think we just need a kind of emergency injection, you know, to kind of stabilize people and set up the industry for recovery. And I think, you know, what's been shown is that if we are positioned well, we can drive the recovery. You know, as I said with the film industry, I mean, if you take the film industry, right, you know, what has everyone been doing in lockdown? Watching Netflix, watching films on TV. You know, we've been consuming cultural content, and there's no tomorrow in lockdown. And you know, the pipeline of kind of need is there. You know, but we've got to kind of, you know, inject a bit of cash to keep these industries stable and kind of reboot them so that all that economic value can kind of bounce back up. You know, as I said I can't remember the study, but I can dig it out. In 2008, it showed the kind of the high impact of the film industry in driving forward the, you know, kind of the economy out of the 2008 recession. I mean, there'll be parts of this industry that will be at the other end of it, as I've talked about. You know, the parts of the industry that are smaller, that require much more kind of tighter knit physical interaction. So there'll be, you know, you can't kind of look at it as kind of just one size fits all in a way. You know, that the industry is museums, the industry is film, the industry is small grassroots, you know, and so that's why we need a kind of, you know, a kind of smart tactical deal, basically, to kind of stabilise and reboot everything.
I understand where you're coming from, because the industry is very important to us from all levels, from mental health to employment and just the value add. What I'm trying to get a sense of is what is the ask of the government? What is the size of that ask? Because obviously, if we're going to campaign for this, if we're going to front the government up, we need to be able to say to them, you know, what sort of figure. I understand you might not be able to just pull a figure out of the air, but in the work you're doing, identifying what that figure is will obviously be important, because it means we can ask for said figure.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the first step was working out what the loss is, and that's today. And so, you know, one of the bits of collaboration we've done with the Fed is that we gave a small amount of funding in order to get the London cut of that data disaggregated from the national picture. So that's how we've partnered on this data today. So the next step is the ask. I mean, if you look at, you know, the Netherlands have put in 300 million euros, France 120 million euros, Germany have put 50 billion in to shore up SMEs and freelancers, which of course has had a kind of massive kind of positive effect on the creative economy. You know, so we just need to step up really and do something at least in that ballpark, at least.
Okay. Let me just move on to my final question. Why, in your view, is there no explicit mention of UK culture and creative industry in the recovery plans of the government? You know, would you have liked something that had specifically addressed that industry? And if you were doing that, what's the 2 or 3 things that you'd really want to see in that plan?
Do you mean in the national government?
Yes.
Yeah. So the question is why don't I think it's there?
Yeah, why is there no explicit mention of UK culture and creative industries?
I don't know. I mean, it seems kind of inexplicable to me, to be honest, that it's not in there, given the kind of what it generates. You know, more people go to theatre than Premier League football. You know, in London alone, it's 58 billion. It's one of the fastest growing industries as well. You know. And about 80% are less likely to be automated. So it's those kind of future-proof jobs as well. So, you know, it's our best asset. I don't know why it's not there. You know, it's not for want of trying and lobbying. I mean, if it was in there, those are the things I would want to. I would want the government to do within the context of its recovery plan is, as I said, to kind of position it as, you know, in the heart of that recovery plan as one of those industries that can be a priority industry that can help to accelerate recovery. You know, I'd want to see the kind of tourism part of that really supported, because that's a way in which we can bring lots of kind of extra value in once international tourism gets back going. You know, and just to kind of really unlock the potential. You know, if it's positioned correctly in the recovery plan, the potential that can be unlocked for the wider economic kind of value for the nation and social value for the nation as well is unprecedented. It just seems like a tremendous missed opportunity, and you know, if I'm really honest, I think, you know, we seem to just be kind of really slow on this. And, you know, lots of task forces are good to kind of keep close to the sector and understand the kind of nuances. But we need some bravery. We need some leadership. We need some cash. You know, there's too much at stake, honestly.
Caroline, Julian, would you like to make a contribution there?
Yes, I was just going to add that we do, of course, have the Cultural Renewal Task Force, which government launched very shortly after its kind of plan to rebuild. So we do have that recognition there, although, as Justine says, that now needs to be backed up with the funds needed in order to support those particularly later to return to work, given social distancing measures, and to step up in the way that other countries across Europe and around the world have done as well. But in terms of many of the challenges that the creative industries face are shared with other sectors. So a high number of freelancers, for example, we've been working very closely with other industries and our fellow kind of industry bodies to champion the needs of creative workers, and particularly those most vulnerable and who have been slipping through the gaps, which has been primarily early career starters, young people, women, those from BAME backgrounds. There's a huge amount that we can do together in order to advocate and make sure that they are recognised in the shape of government policy more broadly. And we have, through our conversations with the Department for Business and with Treasury, had some quite significant wins actually on various different policies that aren't sector specific, but are areas that are major challenges for not just our sector, but others as well. So I think there's been some really key joining up. And I know that colleagues, UK Hospitality on this call, Association of Leading Visitors Attractions, we've worked in partnership with them too, to help make that case.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Sean. I mean, it strikes me that this might be something that we want to do an immediate output on if our voice as the Assembly Economy Committee, in writing to the Chancellor to say that support for this sector is so critical, but moving from the sort of national level to the more local level. And I just wondered if I could ask Helen Clark-Bell, just briefly, if you could add. I mean, I know that in Wimbledon there's the Polka Theatre and the new Wimbledon Theatre. The chair of the Merton Chamber of Commerce is very involved in the creative sector as well, running a very creative studio. I just wondered if you could say something a little bit about what BIDS have been able to do at all to help protect the cultural and creative industries. And I've just merely touched on a couple that I know of in Wimbledon.
Yeah, you're right. We have a strong cultural hub locally, and we have our annual Wimbledon Book Fest. We have our Wimbledon Annual Music Festival, International Music Festival, as well as those that you've mentioned, Leonie. From a bid perspective, frankly, all we've been able to do is to signpost to the Mayor's Fund and also to general business support. At the moment, I think there's so much nervousness about the relationship of what social distancing means for the cultural communities. I think it's a very dangerous slope that we're on, and so I really don't have very much to add to what has already been eloquently put forward by Justine and Caroline.
Thank you. Thank you, Justine. That's actually the end of our questions on culture and creative, and we know that you've left your round table and need to get back to it. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm now going to go back to Susan Hall's questions that we just jumped out of. And Susan, if you want to put those questions to the Federation of Small Businesses. So Rowena, you might want to be poised. And then Helen, also a question, I think, to you. Susan.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've heard an awful lot about what people would like from the government. From Justine Simmons, we want. So I would like to ask the pair of you, what would you like to see the Mayor, because we are the Assembly responsible for questioning the Mayor, what more would you like to see the Mayor doing to help businesses across London, both in terms of direct actions, because he can take those, and also in strategic role to coordinate business groups and local boroughs? Rowena?
Thank you. I think we're returning to the themes that were mentioned at the beginning of the this video conference, and I think they largely revolve around the cost of doing business, which, as we know, is very high in London. The cost of doing business can range quite broadly in terms of how the mayor can impact and feed into this. Everything from affordable housing for Londoners, because one of the biggest problems for small business is recruitment and keeping workers, commitment to paying a living wage and maintaining your business and innovating and growing it. These are a lot for small businesses, even without a global pandemic. I think I would isolate maybe the most recent changes as a specific. So clearly the government has asked of the mayor certain things regarding TfL, but the rise to do with the congestion zone charging, I would say a particular ask might be to look at your local area, your local borough, and for instance, market traders. Could market traders be exempted from the increase in the congestion fees? We're not asking for them to be exempted totally, but just keeping it the existing level that it has been already. Other significant trades that are keeping London going, people who provide services that are maybe entering people's homes. I know where I live, we had to get a repair person in to mend a washing machine. There are a certain level of people providing services that are having to transport themselves across London, and walking in a bike is not an option. And for many of them, public transport is not an option, but public transport is critical to small businesses and keeping them going. But the congestion zone charging is something specific that I can identify to you. Clearly, use of public transport and the advice about public transport is very important. We all know that the timing and communications of messaging regarding use of public transport have to take care of being careful. But the reopening of non-essential retail, for instance, from Monday, they are severely impacted in terms of getting their staff to work, never mind whether the customers are going to return using public transport to travel across London to get to those businesses. So those are the main themes I would say. I'm sure Richard can add and have some other points, but those would be the first ones I'd raise.
Lovely. I couldn't agree with more. Having run a small business for years, I totally understand where you're coming from. Richard, if you concentrate just on London, have you anything to add for Rowena's comments?
Yes, yes, I do. It was a very good run through by Rowena. I think the mayor needs to focus on the long-term stimulation of the city as an international centre. I think it's going to take a battering. Every international centre in the world is going to take a battering. And if London's going to achieve its premier position again, it's going to need a lot of focus and activity from City Hall and from the mayor in a coordinated way. I think he needs to look much more at peer-to-peer support across London. I mean, London and Partners, BIDS, FSB and us. I think that is the mainstays, business communities in London helping each other and helping themselves. And then finally, I think there is something about a new vision for the nature of boroughs in London, which as economic centres, in other words, not relying so much on a city which is almost obsessed by transport in and out of the centre, and not enough about transport to and from the outer boroughs amongst themselves. So I think a more diverse economic life in the city, rather than simply being very much focused on the centre and treating the outside as accommodation.
Oh, I'm so pleased you've said that. That was my next question was, do you think the mayor is assisting inner and outer London businesses equally? Because obviously they face different challenges. Shall we bring in Rajesh at the moment and see what he can say about that? Rajesh.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, for that question. I think so. First of all, I think some of the points made by Rowena around sort of cost of doing business in London. I think we are going through such a big challenge at the moment, but we also must look this to a certain extent as an opportunity to balance the economy between inner London and outer London. More and more people are now working from home, and most businesses say that it's going to be a longer term trend. It's not just a sort of shorter term thing. And as they sort of work more from home or work more remotely, So even if it is not from home, perhaps from a local coffee shop, there is a big opportunity to rebalance the economy. Hopefully, it will also ease off the pressure on our transport infrastructure. There would be less need of traveling into central London, and it will give a much needed boost to the high streets locally in outer London as well. So, and that is why the London Recovery Board is looking at that, and will be looking at that. And London Recovery Board is made of not just it may be the mayor led, but it's not all about GLA. It's a convening board. So we've got a very strong business representation on that board, but also we've got various London boroughs as well, and we've also got the representation from the government. So Paul Scully, the Minister for Small Businesses, would be representing the government on that board. So it's very important that all the parties come together and look at how we turn this big challenge into an opportunity in favor of rebalancing those outer London boroughs. Susan, I know, like yourselves, I live in Zone 5, and these sort of outer London boroughs face this big challenge, and over the years, where local economy has become heavily concentrated in Zone 1, and I think now is the opportunity to change that.
Well, we have been asking that for quite some time, haven't we, Rajesh? So I hope this will be one of the better things that comes out of it. Although, of course, central London, as I think Richard pointed out earlier, is going to be decimated, some of the small businesses, because people aren't going into London. So one thing that comes of it in a good way in outer London will cause problems in inner London. If I can go back to Rowena, really, how successful do you think the government's support measures have been, in particular the new bounce back loan and the business rates holiday? Does the threshold under the business rates holiday applies need to be raised? Actually, I think we've touched on that on and off. So if you could just concentrate at the beginning of that question.
You're on mute, Rowena. We can't hear you. We'd love to hear you, though.
You could repeat the first part of the question that you'd like me to focus on, not the business rate.
It's about the bounce back loans. Thank you.
The bounce back loans were incredibly well received. Have helped a heck of a lot of businesses at a time when CBILS just wasn't cutting through. It just wasn't reaching there at all. I don't have to hand a number on our members who have taken up a bounce back loan, but the general feeling is that it is one of positivity. However, I must redirect it back to my earlier point about the reticence of small businesses to go after debt finance. I really think this is crucial. In terms of access to money, I mean, obviously, a lot of businesses were excluded from the grants and will still be excluded from the discretionary and hardship fund, more recently revised. There is a lot of people who have been excluded from help so far. It isn't to say that there isn't something coming or being talked about or worked upon. I'm simply pointing out that in terms of prioritising and the remit of who is on this meeting here today, we could be looking at not handouts necessarily, but ways in which we can all work together to help. And I think, just for example, the London and Partners Raising Confidence new London Alliance idea. I mean, all of these are really important in building business back up.
Yes, I think we all need to do our part in that for everybody's sake. I'll move on to the next section because I know that we're really running out of time. So these are to Helen, please. How can BIDS play a role in supporting London's businesses at the moment?
Gosh, what a question, Susan. That's just massive for us. We are all over it. We have not stopped working right the way through. We've been hand-holding businesses. And so we're absolutely, similar to the LCCI and FSB, understanding our members' issues quite significantly. With regards to running a local campaign and communicating the strength of the business community, we're running also a #LoveLocal campaign to understand that we need to support our local businesses and our local high street, that within 15, 20 minutes of the Wimbledon town centre, there is a huge catchment area, so for residents to be able to walk in, and those that are working from home to be able to take their lunch in Wimbledon town centre instead of just popping to the toaster and grabbing a piece of toast. So, you know, we need to drive a lot of that and are actively working on that. We started our weekend market, so that's now started back up again to draw footfall into the town centre. We've put in public hand sanitizers, we've dressed the town with banners and baskets and cleaned it. We've done an awful lot in order to prepare the town for the return, as well as working directly with the businesses to manage queues. Sorry, I could go on and on and on that.
No, I understand. I've been involved in bids, and when they work well, they work really, really well. What do you think other bids as well will be able to achieve with the government's fund?
Sorry, which government fund is that?
The government fund that put money into bids. I've got details somewhere.
Oh, yes, the Bid Resilience Fund.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, that is it's very welcome. But it has, we haven't actually received ours yet. We have no notification of how much it's going to be. So it is slow to be coming through. And we're not entirely sure, as I say, how much we're going to be getting for that. But from what I hear, it's about 5% of our annual income. So where we're looking at a major shortfall potentially in levy income because of the potential issues with businesses returning, we are actually doing a cash flow and a budget with an absolute minimal activity as far as expenditure is concerned. So it's going to be hard work for the next year for us in order to deliver the impact that we are used to delivering.
I think it's going to be hard work for everybody, including as poor small business owners. And I feel sorry for all people running businesses at the moment, but we must all go out there with our money and support the businesses. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just come back on one thing, actually, about what the Mayor could do? There are a couple of things that I think are definitely issues that the Mayor could address. One of those is delivery bikes. They are becoming a bit of a plague on the town centre and becoming a real social issue for the town centre. Obviously, they're affecting, they're supporting our hospitality businesses with regards to enabling them to trade in a different way. But actually the lack of ability to deal with the gig economy, and this is not laying the blame at anyone's door in particular, but because they are self-employed and not actually employed by anybody, nobody has responsibility for them. It is a significant issue that's affecting all town centres at the moment. And the other thing is with regards to air quality, we've all enjoyed looking at the skies and breathing fresh air during this time. So putting more pressure on the regeneration and renewal of the bus fleet is something that I would encourage the Mayor to be really putting the accelerator on.
Well, I hear what you say there. Rajesh, did you hear that? Are you going to be able to assist in this way? Because they're both very, very sound comments.
Okay, so thank you for that, Susan. We're going to move on.
Ask Rajesh a question.
No, we're going to move on to the next section because we are starting to run a bit behind. I'm sorry. Which is going to be focusing on tourism, and the questioning now is going to be led by Murad Qureshi, and then we've got some general questions right at the end. Sean has asked a general point that will be taken at the end, Sean. Murad, we've got several people that you're going to put the questions to. Justine had to leave, but she did make some points about tourism before she left. So Murad, don't forget to mute yourself, and the questions are over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I've unmuted myself. Some of our expert panels have mentioned tourism earlier, and I think the main point I got was that they were saying it's usually the first hit and the last to recover in the economy. But what I want to ask our expert panel is, what specific support will be required for those industries dependent on tourism that typically rely on international visitors, especially in light of the quarantine restrictions that the government's imposing? Shall I start with, is Laura there?
Yes, she is. Laura's here. Yes, if we could bring in Laura Citron, who's the Chief Executive of London and Partners. We've referred to London and Partners several times. Laura, it'd be great to hear from you now.
Thanks very much. Thank you for inviting me, and it's good because as you say, it is such an important driver of the London economy and such an important supporter for our hospitality, culture, retail and events sectors. Obviously, at the moment, it's very difficult to forecast what will happen with international tourism. And there are both supply side and demand side issues. On the supply side, for international tourism to be able to resume, there obviously needs to be no quarantine, given that, as we've heard, 90% of international tourists come for less than 2 weeks. But there also need to be airline routes that are running into the city, and hotels need to be able to open safely. So there are a whole set of necessary conditions that would need to be fulfilled for international tourism to be possible. At that point, what will be important will be to get international tourists to want to come back. And I don't think we should underestimate how competitive the market's going to be. We've lost all our international tourists, pretty much, but so had every other tourist destination when they shut down. And so it's a really competitive market. And we know that some of our big competitor cities and countries around the world are spending millions, if not billions, on marketing and special offers to attract international tourists back. So the current projections are that international tourism is going to be down around 60% this year, but honestly, nobody really knows because it depends on what happens with lockdown and quarantine. And that we don't expect to see a recovery to the 2019 levels of international tourism until 2024. So it should recover, but it will take a while. And because of that, domestic consumption is key. I can't emphasize that enough. In the immediate, to help our businesses survive, we have to get domestic consumption back. So we need to get Londoners and later on people from the rest of the UK spending on our high streets, in our West End, in our cultural institutions, in our shops, our cafes, our cinemas, and so on. Because there won't be international tourists back into the city fast enough to save those businesses. And we've heard from many of your guests today quite how urgent the situation is, particularly for our smaller businesses. The only way we can get a quick recovery to save those smaller businesses is by getting demand back fast. And the only way we can get it back fast is from Londoners getting out and supporting their own local businesses in the areas that they can walk or cycle to. Because at the moment, we don't even really have capacity to be bringing people in from the rest of the UK. So certainly in the immediate, our focus as London and Partners, as several of your guests have alluded to, is on how we can give Londoners the confidence to get back out and support their local businesses, and that's really what we're focused on.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. But sorry, there's an interruption there. But Bernard, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
But hi, I mean, I was struck by your comments earlier that the quarantine restriction is a heavy weight on the tourism, given that 90% of people who come to London come for less than 2 weeks, so it's self-defeating. Is there, apart from campaigning against the restriction, is there any other suggestions there that we need to take on board?
Yes, thank you. I mean, firstly, to entirely endorse everything that Laura has just said, the people who will save London's visitor economy will be Londoners. In any normal year, domestic tourism is worth about 80% of the entire value of the tourism economy. But this year, domestic tourism is likely to be about 97% of the entire visitor economy. So it's a major, major shift that we're looking at. The things that have been put in place by government have been, of course, economy-wide, and they've been valuable, necessary and vital, but they have been triaged. And what we require now is something which is much more sector-specific to the visitor economy, to recognise the fact that not only is tourism extraordinarily important to the whole of the UK economy, it's the 5th largest industry, 3rd largest employer, it's the 3rd largest employer in every constituency in every part of the UK, but is also incredibly resilient and crucially employs people at all skill levels. So from people coming out of school with no qualifications through to PhDs and masters. But it's more important than even that. So one of the things that we know, and has already been mentioned during the course of this afternoon, is that for some businesses, it won't be economically viable to open if they have to adhere to 2 metre or even 1 metre or 1.5 metre physical distancing. And that's just because they can't do that in an economically viable fashion because their capacities are going to be so low. So the principal ask that we would ask of government is to continue the fantastic furlough scheme that you've implemented, which has literally saved hundreds of thousands of jobs. But now we need it to sustain such a vital part of our economy that employs loads of people throughout the entire ecosystem of London. And the second is to bolster and boost and give extra confidence to Londoners to know that they can spend their leisure hours and leisure pounds safely, confidently, in their locality. We think just as back in the recession between 2008 and 2013, the vast majority of domestic tourists spent their money locally, supporting local visitor attractions and their pubs and hotels and restaurants. And I suspect that will be exactly the same this time too. But this time, I think it will be for enlightened philanthropic reasons. People wanting to make sure that they're spending their money in their local community, so they're giving back. And I think one of the things that we've seen over the course of the last 12 weeks is that people have begun to really appreciate what they've had now it's been taken away from them. So the number of people, particularly Londoners, who've downloaded recipes and gardening tips and jigsaws and gone on virtual tours of museums and galleries has been absolutely phenomenal. We know the appetite is there, therefore. We just need to invite them back warmly, safely, to get them contributing to the vitality of one of the jewels in London's crown.
Well, Bernard and Laura, I've certainly got the message. Londoners have got to go out there and spend their money locally in their economy. I only wish my pubs were able to be open so I can watch the footy tonight, for example, which now I'm going to spend at home watching in my own company rather than other people's company. But can I now go to I think Kate we had lined up as well to say a few comments about the long-term impacts of COVID on London's tourism industry. I mean, I think we've got some idea of what needs to be done immediately. What's the long-term thing that we need to do in London to keep the tourism industry going after these difficult times? After hopefully we emerge out of these difficult times.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. And sorry I couldn't join you for the first hour. I think the critical thing is sustaining them long enough to be able to come out the other side. So when we look at the statistics that DCMS published today about the DCMS whole environment and then looked at tourism, tourism is quite clearly the most vulnerable in the short term. And if we don't do something in the short term, we simply won't have them there when we come to the recovery. And it is quite critical, as Laura and as Bernard has said. So when we look at that, the DCMS stats said that for DCMS sectors as a whole, 2/3 felt that they were at risk and would not last the next 3 months. That rises to 80% when we look at tourism, and in our own statistics, when we've surveyed our own membership across London, it's potentially even higher within London because of the double whammy of losing the international visitors and also losing the cultural and the office customers that you've got coming through. So we really have a hit to the central London and outer London economy as a whole. When we look at 6-month viability, who thinks they're going to survive more than 6 months? Just 19% of tourism businesses think that they have the potential to survive for the next 6 months without further additional support. So if we're looking ahead at our tourism economy to drive growth, to bring us out of recession, as it did in 2010, we are really going to have to invest in it now and provide that sector-specific support that Bernard said. Otherwise, we will turn around when we come out of this crisis and they won't be there. And if we look at what happened post-2010, you had 6% year-on-year growth in tourism and hospitality, generating 1 in 6 of net new jobs, and a third of all new jobs created after the financial crash came from tourism and hospitality. So we know we have the potential to do it, but this time around, in the short term, we aren't that economic driver. And equally, London cannot be that economic driver in hospitality and tourism as it was in 2010, unless we take good care of it now. So we need to wrap these businesses in a little bit more cotton wool. We need to move to more sector-specific support and help them get back on their feet. And when we're looking at that, it's about taking us through to the start of the next season, which is really April. For a lot of our tourism-related businesses, they only have a short period of time to earn the money, and it's vital that we get them back on their feet to start earning it. So short-term, Bernard is absolutely right. We need the opening date confirmed 3 weeks out from potentially we might be able to take some customers back on the 4th of July. We have no date confirmed for our businesses to reopen, no date on which they can take bookings. They are facing having to cancel bookings for July and August because of the uncertainty, and we have no guidelines under which they are operating. And for major parts of our industry in London, we have no certainty at all of the date when they can reopen their conference and banqueting suites, when they can take business meetings, when they can accommodate business travellers. So I think we do really need to have that certainty in the short term to help them get the livelihood through for the long term. And then it's about making sure we flatten out the 3 key spikes in the road, 3 key bumps that these businesses are facing. Come July, we have some of the support mechanisms withdrawn, and these businesses will only have just got up and running. That's furlough, but it's also PAYE deferment on tax. We've then got another hit in November when we don't think a lot of our cultural and events industry in London and our hotel, conference and banqueting will be up and running, but we have no furlough support. And then in March next year, all of our taxes come back into play. The VAT deferment, the business rates holiday, that will hit hard in March and April. And unless we do something, that is when London hospitality will suffer the most, because it will have gone through 3 winters without any trade coming in by that stage, because you haven't got the international visitors returning. And international in hotels, in London hotels, 80% of our demand is international. And not only is it important to the London hotels in and of themselves, but that drives the revenue for the nationwide chains. So unless we get it right for our London hotels quickly, we are going to have a knock-on effect. We are going to be a drain rather than a driver of economic growth going forward.
Well, thank you for that contribution, Kate. And telling us that we just have got to see ourselves through somehow to the next season in April and get all the support possible. But realistically, are we ever going to see the same level of tourists again that we've seen in recent years? Is that realistic with what people are doing now when they're talking about travelling? I mean, for example, conferences. I think they're an important part of tourism. London has host to, it staggers me, all the conferences that we can have over a weekend. And they're just not the political ones. There are a whole host of them. In every field you can imagine.
Conferences, exhibitions, business events, they are critical. If you look in the run-up at Q4, if you just look on Park Lane with those big business those hotels that take business bookings, they will all have a massive amount of business on their books, which is in jeopardy at the moment because we don't have a date from which that can return. So that is going to take a long time to recover. There is a cash burn for these businesses while they remain closed or while they're trading sub-economically. And let's be in no doubt, whether we have 1 metre or 2 metres social distancing, it's the difference between survivability and business failure. At 2 metres, they're going to be opening with 30% of their revenues. At 1 metre, it's 70%. But 70% is just break even. So Laura's absolutely right. It's going to take until 2024 for our international visitor numbers to recover. If we look at what happened in 2010, it took as long again for the business profitability to recover. So this is something that we need to be in for the long haul to make sure that these businesses are sustained before we come back. With the right conditions, a good marketing support, some fiscal stimulus, some tax incentives to be able to encourage consumers to go out. We can see a return of domestic tourism, day trippers, domestic overnight visitors, but it is going to need that concerted message from every single stakeholder that when these businesses get the green light to reopen, that we tell consumers that it's safe to do so. We need a sort of President Macron moment where he stood up and said it was everybody's civic duty to go and eat and drink out again, and to staycation in France. We need that kind of confidence building, that reassurance to people that the risk is low, that the businesses have world-class beating protocols in place to keep them safe, that going out again is something that they can do safely and securely and are not going to endanger their fellow citizens. But it's going to have a concerted message from all of us if we're to get through the next 6 months.
Kate,
Okay.
the residents of Paris certainly came out on Monday night from all the video clips I've seen. So maybe
thank
we've
you
got
for
to do
that.
something like that.
Murad,
Final. Yeah.
that is, sorry, we do need to move on because we're just moving past 4 o'clock now. And so we have still got another whole section of questions, and we've got a final question. Laura, I saw you put your golden hand up. We've got a question for you anyway, so perhaps if you can bring that in. And this question is now going to be asked by Assembly Member Unmesh Desai, so do please unmute yourself. Thank you for that, Murad. Unmesh, unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair. My question is to you, Ms. Citron. You talked about, I've got 4 points, Chair, and I'm aware of the time, so I'll try to be as quick, I'll try to be brief. Ms. Citron, you talked about your role being to give Londoners the confidence to support their local businesses, but you talked in very general terms. Can you be a bit more specific about the concrete work you're actually doing, right now to support the tourist sector? And also, equally importantly, what more do you think should be done in the near future?
Laura, don't forget to unmute yourself. Laura.
Thank you very much. Well, this morning we went live with the campaign across London to support a speedy and responsible recovery in consumer spending built on consumer confidence. It's called Because I'm a Londoner, and I'm very happy to share with the committee some details about the campaign. The objective of the campaign is to support our retail, hospitality, culture and events businesses to survive this period of coronavirus, with a particular focus on smaller businesses in local areas. And as we've said, we will do that by getting Londoners to have the confidence to get back out and spend. So when we were thinking about how to design this marketing campaign to give Londoners that confidence, we looked at a lot of research, and we actually have more primary research in the field at the moment. And it needs to do really 4 things. It needs to reassure people that going out, as long as you do it safely and you follow the restrictions, is safe, as Kate has said. And so that is part of it. The second point is that we need to encourage people to understand that supporting your local business is an act of solidarity with the city. As you were saying, like the Macron moment, it is, we've seen this great outpouring of solidarity for the city and support for our fellow Londoners during the crisis. And we need to make sure that people understand that if you are in a position to go out and support your local businesses, doing that is the right thing to do. Really importantly, it must be encouraging responsible behaviour. And so we're working very closely, not only with TfL and the Mayor's Office, but also with the Cabinet Office Coronavirus Communication Cell to make sure that all the messaging in the campaign is really closely aligned to the guidance. And we are never, ever encouraging people to do things which are against the restrictions. This is obviously a really big problem, and so we need to have a big solution. And that's why we've taken a citywide approach, where we are working in an inclusive alliance of London businesses, cultural organisations, local authorities, business improvement districts, and all of the trade associations on this call today, so that we can reach as many businesses as possible and make as much noise about this as possible. And it's really important that even though the beneficiaries of the campaign are largely smaller businesses and cultural organisations, it's backed by some of London's biggest brands and big businesses that have really large-scale audiences and big marketing firepower. And we're delighted that some really big businesses have come on board to support it. So the campaign has rolled out today. It's providing free content and support for SMEs through an online portal that is open to everyone to register for, and we are going out through all of our different networks and multiply groups, including local authorities, business improvement districts and trade associations, to invite as many businesses as possible to take part and benefit from the campaign. We are slightly keeping our powder dry at the moment, so we're launching it now to get businesses on board, but at the moment, obviously, only retail is open, only non-essential retail is open. So we would expect it to ramp up over the summer as hopefully we get hospitality open and we get more of our cultural attractions open. So that's broadly where we are with the campaign today. It's called Because I'm a Londoner. You're all welcome to check it out. And if you have constituents who you think would benefit, we'd also really love to work with you to make sure that your constituents know about it and that we can support them.
Thank you. You actually answered a number of my questions. I think I certainly, I think I'll speak on behalf of my colleagues. We would appreciate some regular briefings from London partners. You talked about working with us as constituency members. Some of us are London-wide members. But I don't want to be negative, and I did check with my colleagues, for the last 3 months since lockdown started, we've not had any communication from London and partners. And I think it's really important that the Economic Committee, either through the chair or whatever, that we actually have that information. Just two very quick points. You talked about networking and so on, get the information out through networks. But Rajesh Agarwal, the deputy mayor, if he's still with us, he talked earlier.
Yes, he is. He's still here.
Our deputy, okay. He talked earlier about London partners, one of his roles being to put larger businesses in touch with smaller ones. Can you give some concrete examples of that? You talk about Nike and the big brands, but it would be good to have 1 or 2 concrete examples of how that's actually being put into practice.
And so, Laura, if you, we've had some of the other committees have had sessions where they've been briefed in detail on particularly difficult areas. Would that be something that London and Partners would be able to offer members of this committee? Just to add that on to the question from Assembly Member Unmesh Desai just there. So if you could answer those.
So very, very happy to share an update, and we'll do that by the end of this week. On support, peer-to-peer support and support for connecting smaller businesses with larger businesses, as Rajesh referred to, we run 2 programs for smaller London businesses. The Mayor's International Business Programme, which is for what we would describe as scale-up companies. So they are fast-growing and already have at least 10 employees and £1 million of turnover, supporting them to internationalise. And the Business Growth Programme, which is for slightly earlier stage businesses, usually around 3 to 5 employees. Typically across both of those programmes with a real focus on technology and innovation. But actually in the current crisis, we have opened up our Business Growth Programme also to tourism businesses because they needed support. So those programmes are providing both peer-to-peer support and mentoring, a lot of it, but also opportunities for those businesses to meet and pitch big companies that will be their potential clients. Because for all businesses that are B2B, and we've been talking in this call predominantly about business-to-consumer businesses that serve obviously consumer audiences, but in London's tech sector, a large number of them actually they serve businesses or their customers. And so for those smaller businesses to be able to grow, they obviously need to be able to find big corporate clients. So we do a lot of work connecting smaller businesses to big companies, both in London and internationally, so they can grow by winning new contracts.
Chair, can I just finish on this note? Can I give a big plug for our corner shops? I personally, in the first month of lockdown, would have found it very difficult without my local corner shop. I know that sentiment has been echoed on television, in the press by so many people. And let's make sure we don't forget them when times get better. They will get better when.
I think we've probably all relied on our corner shops and our local bakeries and many people who've sort of almost completely reinvented themselves into local takeaways. And many people have certainly mentioned to me how thankful that they are that they've been able to go to their local shops. I'm going to move on to the next section, which is on hospitality, because we asked, Susan, we did cover the point that you did say that you wanted to raise on communications. So I am going to move on because Unmesh did cover that off. So I'm going to move on to hospitality, and I'm going to go to Assembly Member Sean Bailey next, who's going to ask the first couple of questions here. Over to you, Sean. Don't forget to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Let me jump straight into it. How has London's hospitality sector been impacted by COVID-19, and how has it been helped by government measures? If I go to Laura with that, probably first.
Do we want Laura to answer that one first? Are you
Yes.
still muted?
I think you're unmuted, aren't you, Laura?
I am, yes. Hello. I think as Kate has spoken to very eloquently, and she's probably better placed than I am to speak to the overall sectoral impacts. London's hospitality sector has been hit very, very hard by coronavirus, and there's been, as Kate has described, a whole series of different things that have affected it. At the most obvious level, the closing of international borders and the lack of international tourists, the public transport capacity issues making it difficult for people to be mobile within the city, restrictions on long distance travel within the UK, meaning that people are not coming to London from other parts, but also the almost complete stop of large-scale events, which about a third of our international tourists would typically be coming in for large-scale conventions and events. The fact that the ExCeL Centre has been a hospital, that brings in about 4 million visitors a year, would typically be going into the ExCeL Centre for conventions and events, so I wouldn't underestimate the impact of the business tourism and the conventions and events side of London's hospitality sector. So all have been very, very significantly affected by those different impacts of coronavirus. From our side, our immediate support has been to those businesses directly. So we've been supporting our community of tourism and hospitality businesses to access really expert tailored advice that's very relevant to them, delivered by expert lawyers and accountants talking about the specifics of what furlough means for a hotel or for a very specific type of business, as well as providing that peer-to-peer and community support. And on business tourism and major events, there is still active business that we can win, and our team are still bidding week in, week out to win events for London in 2021 and beyond, and we are still taking bookings for events for 2021 and beyond. The market for 2020 has pretty much gone, but London is still an attractive destination for events in the future. The worry now is that we can book the events for 2021 and beyond, but will the supply chain be there to actually service them? And that, as somebody else had mentioned, is becoming an increasing area of concern.
Thank you.
Can I ask Kate to
Yes.
focus on the how government help measures how they've been received, how they've been used, how helpful they've been for this particular sector, for the hospitality sector?
Kate.
Thank you very much. So yes, Laura's covered it. It has been a devastating impact. We've got about 93% of our revenue has fallen off a cliff over the course of this year, so we're 95% down. Over the quarter one, so before we went into lockdown, over quarter one, hospitality revenues declined by 21%. And in March and April, the latest ONS figures on GDP, we accounted for a third of the slump in GDP. So we have been disproportionately hit by COVID. It started at the end of January when international visitor numbers declined, and it fell off a cliff in London from half term. February half term was when we saw a real drop in visitor numbers. In terms of that support, the far and away the biggest support we have had is furlough. So 87% of our teams are currently furloughed. Nationwide, that's 2.8 million people. In London, it's about 610,000 people that are currently on furlough. And we're waiting to see when we can bring them back and return. In terms of the other government support measures, they've been very helpful nationwide, less helpful in London. And I know you've already covered this in part, but obviously the business rates grant support. Very, very few hospitality businesses, if any, in London will have a rateable value of £51,000. And nationwide, it's about 71% of hospitality business activity takes place in a premises with a rateable value of more than that. In London, that rises to 93% of hospitality business takes place in a venue, a premises, with a rateable value of more than that. So they've been excluded from that grant support. And the loans, bounce back loans, have been helpful, but about 60% of our members have been refused a CBILS loan or a CLBL's loan. Particularly hits London hospitality hard because there is a state aid test in the European Union that requires you to certify that you are not an undertaking in difficulty. And our Treasury guidelines have taken that as a very strict definition that you must have no more than a third of brought forward losses. So if you are a hospitality business that has been rapidly expanding in London, investing in new premises, opening new sites, employing people, it's not uncommon to have brought forward losses because that's what you do. You reinvest, you make a loss when you open. It takes 2 to 3 years to get into profitability for a big site, a big development. So about 60% of our businesses have been refused CBILS. So the main support that they've had from the government is to do with furlough. It's been a real lifeline, but we need to look for that going forward. The other support, which is non-financial, lease forfeiture moratorium and a debt enforcement moratorium have been critical in protecting many of our small businesses in London from aggressive debt enforcement activity by their landlords. So making sure that they don't lose their sites. That has been the other single big support.
I'm sorry to cut in on you, but we are running short of time, so I do need
so
everyone
sorry,
to, if everyone can be quite snappy. Sean, can you go on with the next question?
I can. Let me just move beyond the next question, and I'll leave it there, Chair. How easy? We heard a lot about specific sector support going ahead. You'd like it to be more specific.
I think.
I'm assuming. How easy is it to identify the businesses in your sector? Are they easily identified, or could some people fall through that net as well?
They're relatively easily identified, usually through the planning or the licensing regime.
Okay.
It's not going to make, and also business rates. It's not going to cover everybody, but there are discretionary grants that were made available by the government as well for people who didn't have a premises or weren't a business rates payer. But you can specifically identify by planning classification or licensing use what is a hospitality business.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Bernard, I'm probably not going to be able to pull you in at this point because we are really seriously running out of time. I need to move on to Caroline Russell, and I think she may well be pulling you in at that point because she's just going to ask a couple of other questions that and you may come in there. So, Assembly Member Caroline Russell, unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I have. Yes, I have two questions, and these are for Kate and for Bernard. We heard just earlier from Kate about the difficulty of preparing for reopening when you don't know what the regulations are going to be, you don't know what the dates are, when you can start taking bookings from. So my question is sort of what does the hospitality sector require in terms of further specific guidance to open safely and obviously with minimising the risk of spreading the virus?
We don't need anything other than the government to announce the date and publish the guidance that they've worked with us on. We have spent the last 2 weeks with Bernard and a number of other industry stakeholders working on the guidance. We have a very detailed, comprehensive industry set of protocols which are drawing on world best practice that cover the whole of the hospitality and tourism sector. We're just waiting to push the button to publish it. All we need is a date.
Okay, thank you very much. Bernard, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you very much. Kate is entirely right. If we simply waited for government guidance, nothing would happen. And I mean that in a very honest way, on the basis that all of our gardens, parklands, National Trust properties, Kew Gardens, zoos and safari parks have all managed to open without the benefit of government guidance that we've been working on for 3 weeks. Now, frankly, if they can do it and if IKEA can do it, the rest of the visitor economy as well. It is getting incredibly frustrating to see that the government handling of tourism economy in particular has largely been by press release as opposed to direct action. So we're waiting for tomorrow for there to be absolute confirmation that the rest of the visitor economy can open safely and responsibly, as we have already, on the 4th of July. When we managed to overturn the government's legislation which prohibited zoos and safari parks from opening, we got that changed by assertive campaigning within 8 days. We shouldn't need to do that. It should be absolutely clear that we can open in a safe and responsible manner. And I just want to give a very good indication of whether you just think actually the largest organisations are going to be immune and safe from this. Both Westminster Abbey and St Paul's Cathedral receive no government funding or funding from the Church of England or from the state. And 90% of all of their ticket buyers are from overseas. The longer 14-day quarantine goes on, you may see Westminster Abbey and St Paul's Cathedral closed.
Right.
Just think about that for a second in terms of the way that Britain portrays itself in the world, and indeed our soft power and cultural diplomacy.
So for Westminster Abbey and St Paul's, it's about increasing the number of overseas visitors who are able to come in, and we've got the problem of many of them only come for 2 weeks, and so that doesn't cover their quarantine period. And Kate, you were very, very clear. It's published, so thank you. How will measures like the 2-metre social distancing rules affect the hospitality industry? And do you think there need to be some exceptions to the rule? And it sounds like you've done a lot of work on working out what the guidance is so that people can open safely. So perhaps you could just talk us through that.
Yes, of course. So obviously we're a national organisation, but we have multinational brands who are within our membership. So our members have safely opened hotels, bars, restaurants in China, Hong Kong, and across Europe. So we've built on their best practice, and we've built on the lessons they've learned there. So we know we have the best possible protocols. We can keep people safe. And in fact, 30% of our hotels have continued to trade safely throughout the coronavirus, many of them in central London, housing the homeless, housing NHS workers, acting as convalescence homes for people who've come out of Nightingale hospitals or their own hospitals. We've not had a single case of COVID, and we've not had a problem with infection control. Our protocols are so robust that we've been able to look after the most at-risk people throughout the crisis and the pandemic. So we know we can do it, and we've published it. Social distancing is critical. I've said before, 2 metres, you open at 30% of your normal revenues and you're opening at a loss. And a quarter of our London hotels, a quarter of our London pubs and restaurants say they would not be able to open at 2 metres. So it's the difference between opening and not opening for a quarter. For the remaining 3 quarters, it's the difference between trading at 30% of normal revenues or 70% of normal revenues. And that's with the additional costs that you would put in place to make sure you had greater sanitation, greater hygiene, and additional members of staff to make sure that people are kept safe and kept distant from each other at 1 metre. So it's about enforcing that. So it would be the difference between viability and going bust, put simply.
So it's the difference between viability and going bust. Can you just reassure me that the best practice that you're looking to from abroad, does that include the 1 metre distancing or not?
Yes. So there's a variable array of different measures that other countries have put in place. A lot of people have adopted 1.5 or 2 metres during the course of the height of their pandemics, and they've successfully reduced it to 1 metre across Europe. So 1 metre is the World Health Organization recommended distance to be safe, and where the level of risk decreases dramatically. So at no social distancing, you've got a 13% risk of infection. At 1 metre social distancing, you've got a 2.6% risk of infection, and at 2 metres, it drops down by half to 1.3. So it's not safe versus unsafe, it's safe versus safest. So it's not that we're putting people at risk, and when you've got a very low level of infection in the general community, and in London it is extremely low at the present point in time, you are talking about a risk of infection, not a risk to life. That is manageable, and that risk at 2.6% risk of infection is minimised further by extensive sanitation and hygiene and cleaning. So all of those protocols take account of all of that to make sure that we can be safe at 1 metre.
And do you see the case but just one tiny
Very
thing.
quickly.
Just the case for going down to 1 metre, because I can see economically it makes a massive difference. Would you have that in conjunction with a ramping back up to 2 metres if infection rates went up?
Of course, you would have to take account of the risk and the science that comes in, but you also need to take account of the socio-economic impact of high levels of unemployment as a result of jobs being at risk. If we go forward with 2 metres, we know that there's 1 million jobs across the UK in hospitality at risk. So the impact of long-term unemployment, of reducing young people's life chances of getting into work, because we are the first taste of work for so many of our young people, particularly in London. You have that, and you've also got the impact on mental health and well-being for those people who are not able to return from furlough and have the anxiety of not knowing whether they've got a job to come back to in the short medium term. So I do think we need to look at it not just from a strict health perspective, but a socio-economic and a public health and an environmental health perspective of health and well-being in mental health.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. I just want to pose a question to Rajesh, who I know is imminently needs to leave us. We've heard some very clear messaging from a number of our guests about wanting dates, wanting to have sector-specific assistance. A lot of this is all poised towards the government, but I did mention when you first started some time ago now that we would want to know a little bit more about what's going on with the Pay It Forward programme, which is a mayoral initiative. And just from your perspective, how successful that's been in terms of hospitality, and what more that the mayor can do to assist the hospitality industry. So if you can tell us about Pay It Forward. I did ask the mayor, or yes, it was me, and asked the mayor about this at the last mayor's questions in May, and he said £100,000 have been put into Pay It Forward and 160 companies have been assisted. How has it developed since then? Who's it helping?
Well, thank you very much. Just before I go, this Pay It Forward is quite exciting crowdfunding platform. It's basically to help small businesses where they can pre-sell vouchers for their services or goods that will be provided in the future. And it's a great opportunity for Londoners to champion local businesses, and we've seen that it's picking up thanks to thousands of Londoners who have nominated businesses who have put themselves forward, and the numbers have gone up quite a lot. So we've doubled since probably when you spoke to the mayor last. So it's over 200,000, but it's still, not what is important here are the individual case studies of small businesses who have found it as a sort of big difference, whether it's small businesses in Harrow, many small businesses. There are curry houses, there are hairdressers, there are small coffee shops, small clothing shops, all different small businesses who have taken advantage of this scheme. But this is just one of the many things that is being done. Frankly, the scale of the challenge is absolutely phenomenal. And we've been very quick to point out to the government wherever the businesses have been falling through the cracks, whether it's because of the higher rateable value, or whether it's for the self-employed people, whether it's extending the furlough scheme or making the furlough scheme more workable for the part-time employees, and so on. So there is a lot more that can be done, but we welcome the work that the government has done so far, but there are still, the fact is there are businesses falling through the cracks, and we'll continue to champion things that we can do directly, but also the things which we can lobby the government for. And I'm glad to see the government and the mayor working together on London Transition Board and on the London Recovery Board.
Yes, I think the overall support that there has been from the government, which Sean referred to in some of his remarks very near the beginning as well. I think nobody could fault the Chancellor for the overall level of support. I think what we're doing here is we're digging into some of the areas that are sector specific or type of employment specific, where it still needs to be tailored to ensure that we come out of this with the bounce back into economic health that all of us would wish to see. Can I take this opportunity to thank all of our guests for their contribution to this meeting. It's been fantastic that we've heard from such a diversity of views, and it's been very important, I think, for the London Assembly in looking into this area to hear from you all. So thank you very much. You are very welcome at this point, if you've got other things to do, because some of you have now been on the call for a long time, to discontinue your participation, because we've got one other item that we want to consider this afternoon. So, Assembly members, could I just ask if you could note the report that we received prior to today's discussion, and also can you delegate authority to me as the Chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any appropriate outputs from this meeting? Is that noted and agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
And thank you for unmuting yourself to say that. And so I move on to item 11 on the agenda, which is to do with the Economy Committee work programme. And in addition to the recommendation on the agenda that we approve our programme, I would like to suggest that the committee writes to the UK government regarding the Brexit transition period. Richard Burge, quite near the beginning of our discussion today, from the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Carolyn Fairbairn, the Director General, as she was then, of the CBI, and many others have been talking about the need for the government to negotiate some flexibility, because the timing was set before we were aware of the impact of the coronavirus was going to have on our economy. And the date by which both the UK government and the EU need to agree an extension to the transition period is the 1st of July, and it's therefore important that the committee considers this at the earliest opportunity, and that is this meeting, in light of ongoing developments. Party group leaders were consulted on this, as it's an additional piece of work that was not approved under the Assembly's previous work programme that went to the Oversight Committee. So can I ask that the committee note the work programme as agreed under delegated authority from Oversight in May 2020, and delegate authority to me as the Chair in consultation with the party group lead members to agree a letter to the UK government requesting that the Brexit transition period be extended in light of the coronavirus pandemic, which is affecting everybody around the world, including our close trading partners in the EU, but trading partners everywhere else as well. And I've had notification that some people might wish to speak on this, and Caroline Russell, I think you indicated first, followed by, sorry, it was Susan Hall first, followed by Sean Bailey. Apologies, I'm reading the wrong list. Susan Hall, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I have unmuted myself. The government has already confirmed that there will be no extension and that the EU has agreed to intensify the talks. By extending the transition period, we would bring yet more uncertainty. Those of you that were not happy with Brexit have simply got to let this go. We've got so many issues. We've just sat through a long meeting with people saying all the problems we've got in London. I would suggest that we look at that and see how we can put all our efforts into that and let the government deal with Brexit. The government was voted in on the back of being very, very firm on Brexit. So this constant whinging about timelines is totally ridiculous in my view. You most certainly will not get me to agree to any nonsense in this respect. We need to be looking after London businesses. That is what the London Assembly is here to do.
Well, thank you for your usual robust contribution, Susan. I'd just like to remind you that I wasn't whinging and I wasn't trying to block Brexit. And in fact, I referred to a global pandemic and the fact that the context in which the original date was set has completely changed. But you're obviously suffering from amnesia or lack of understanding of the wider impact. And it wasn't just me that's saying it, it was also the Richard Burge, who is the Chief Executive of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry. But obviously you would call him a whinger like everyone else.
Yes.
The next person who indicated that they wanted to speak was Assembly Member Sean Bailey. Sean, unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to add to the debate. I think it needs to be put on record that all through the Brexit debate, the real pain was the uncertainty. And it is my belief that the longer we extend this period, the more uncertain it becomes. I actually think the situation we face with COVID now means that in every part of our economy, we need to be building as much certainty as we can, as quickly as we can. And that's why I'm not entirely in favour of extending the period for negotiation. I also believe that in London, for the London Assembly, we have a panoply of issues that we need to look at closely, and I believe we should spend our work programme time doing that. Today's meeting was a very clear demonstration of a lot of things that I believe we'll have to do cross-party, and I believe this could become a distraction for us, because as you well know, Chair, there are very strongly held views on Brexit within the Assembly, and I'd much rather we didn't descend into another argument on that, and that we focused on the very many issues that we have. Again, things like sector-specific, we will all have to go to the government to make the points on those things, and I think we as a group of politicians, we as a London Assembly really need to concentrate on that to get London back on its feet as quickly as possible, because as we all know, we are the engine room of the UK economy, and I think we should be focused on that. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you very much, and it's also welcome that you were able to make a contribution without saying that what I'd said was nonsense or that I was whinging, but I would just like to correct you that this is not to do with blocking Brexit or being against Brexit. This is to do with the specific situation that we find ourselves in. I'm now going to bring in Assembly Member
Chair,
Caroline.
Can I just say one thing? I just to be very clear, I didn't accuse you of trying to block Brexit at all. I'm trying to respond in the manner that you're putting this out. I did not accuse you of that at all.
Thank you. No, and I found that very helpful, and I'm glad words like whinging and nonsense, you didn't feel necessary to use them. I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Caroline Russell, who has also indicated, and don't forget to unmute yourself.
I have not forgotten to unmute myself. Thank you, Chair. I think anyone who listened to the meeting this afternoon would be in no doubt about the dire situation that the whole ecosystem of businesses, and particularly those small businesses that are like a sort of beating heart of our city, the dire situation that these businesses and cultural institutions and cultural practitioners are facing. And I think it was, again, Richard Burge, he said there would be a massive 68% increase in bureaucracy, particularly in the that's even with an agreed Brexit deal, but let alone a no-deal Brexit. And I think the risk of a no-deal Brexit is so serious in relation to the situation that we find ourselves in now as we come through this pandemic situation, that we absolutely have to, it's only responsible to call to delay the decision so that we don't end up with, to get that delay, that extension, so that we don't risk going out on a no-deal Brexit, because that on top of what our businesses are facing now would be absolutely catastrophic. So I fully support the Chair in her suggestion of writing to the government in these terms.
So actually, I think given that we've got very clearly expressed views, I think I'm just going to put this to the vote. Can I see all those in favour of me sending a letter to the UK government asking for an extension in the Brexit period? And I can actually see, because we've got everyone just left on screen, so that's 4 votes in favour. And can I see those people who are actually against such a letter being sent by me as the chair of the Economy Committee? And I can see 2 votes against that. And well, that's a clear majority of the committee, so I will be writing to request that the UK government, we have seen that the government only this week, after saying it was absolutely not going to give free school meal vouchers over the summer holidays, Marcus Rashford managed to secure a change of heart. And we've also seen the government saying that they're not going to impose all of the structures so that as goods come into this country after the 31st of December. And I'm still hopeful that, you know, we may see further flexibility on this. That is the last item on today's agenda. Can I thank everybody for their contribution? The date of the next meeting, which I'd like everyone to note, and I will probably still be held in this strange virtual format, and thank you all for struggling through with the technology, because actually occasionally it was quite hard to hear people and a few people froze. But thank you very much for all of that. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for Tuesday, the 4th of August 2020, when we'll be returning to COVID and its impact this time on employees. That will be at 2 p.m. There is no other business I consider to be urgent, so I declare this meeting closed. Many thanks.